Chapter 1. The Path of Balance. The wind was a blade. It flayed the exposed skin on Ria's cheeks, a raw, frozen burn. Every breath she dragged into her lungs was an agony of ice, a protest from a body born for sea-level humidity, not this impossible altitude. Her fingers, double-gloved, were numb claws gripping the frayed rope line. Below her, the world dropped away into a churning sea of gray clouds. There was no ground. There was only the abyss and the thin, treacherous ledge she followed. The path of balance. That was what the old maps called it, the faded, hand-drawn things she bought in a dusty shop in Leh, a route only for madmen and pilgrims. Ria was not a pilgrim. She was a hunter, and her prey was a ghost. Her brother's ghost, Rohan. She paused, pressing her body flat against the rock face. The mountain shuddered, a deep groan that vibrated through the stone and into her bones. A cascade of ice and pebbles skittered past her, peppering her hood before disappearing into the void. She did not flinch. She simply waited for the tremor to pass, her breathing a controlled, shallow rhythm. Panic was a luxury this high up, a death sentence. From an inner pocket of her parka, she pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. His journal. Its pages were stiff with cold. She opened it to the last entry, the script a familiar, confident scrawl, though shakier than usual. October 17th. Found it. The path is real, not a legend. It's exactly where the old woman said it would be. Treacherous is an understatement, but the readings are off the charts. A complete magnetic dead zone. Something is up here, something ancient. I have to see it. Ria traced the words with a numb fingertip. A magnetic dead zone. That was Rohan, the scientist, the adventurer, always chasing the anomaly. She was the medic, the pragmatist, the one who patched him up when his chases went wrong. This time there was no one to patch him up. He had simply vanished, 2 months without a word. The search parties found his base camp abandoned. They found his tracks leading to this cliff face, to this impossible path. And then nothing. She tucked the journal away, its presence a small, hard weight against her ribs. She was not here for anomalies. She was here for him. She pushed off the rock and continued. The path narrowed further, barely the width of her boot. The rope line, her only promise of safety, was old, woven from some kind of fibrous plant she did not recognize. It was anchored every 50 feet by iron spikes driven deep into the rock, each one coated in a thick rime of ice. They looked ancient, as old as the mountain itself. Hours bled into a single, frozen moment of survival. Left foot, right foot, grip the rope, breathe. The world shrank to these simple, desperate actions. The sun was a weak, indifferent disk in the thin air, offering no warmth. She ate snow to wet her throat, the cold a searing pain on her tongue. Her mind, starved of oxygen, began to play tricks. She heard whispers in the wind, saw movement at the edge of her vision, phantoms of the high places. She ignored them. They were not real. Rohan was real. Finding him was real. The change was so gradual she almost missed it. The wind, which had been a constant, shrieking assault, began to soften. The air grew still. A profound, unnatural silence descended, broken only by the crunch of her boots on the ice-covered rock. She rounded a sharp bend in the path, and there it was, the end of the ledge. It opened onto a wide, flat plateau, and beyond it, nestled in a caldera carved from the mountain's peak, was a village. It was impossible. Nothing should live here. The air was too thin, the winters too brutal, yet it existed. The buildings were crafted from the same dark stone as the mountain, their roofs angled steeply to shed the heavy snows. Thin tendrils of smoke rose from a dozen chimneys, curling straight up into the windless sky. The layout was precise, geometric, radiating from a central structure with a multi-tiered roof, a monastery or temple of some kind. There was no joy in her discovery, no relief. A deep primal unease settled in her gut. The silence was wrong. A village, no matter how remote, should have sounds. The chatter of people, the cry of a child, the barking of a dog. This place had none. It was a perfect, silent tableau. A single figure stood waiting for her at the entrance to the plateau. A man. He was dressed in a thick maroon robe, his head shaved, his face weathered into a mask of deep wrinkles. As she took the final, stumbling steps off the path and onto solid ground, he bowed his head slightly, and he smiled. It was the smile that broke the spell of the place. It was wide, serene, and utterly without warmth. It did not reach his eyes, which were small, dark, and impossibly ancient. They watched her with a placid, unnerving intensity, the eyes of a predator that has waited a very long time. "Welcome, traveler," the man said. His voice was a soft, melodic hum, yet it carried with perfect clarity in the still air. "You have walked the path of balance. You are weary. Come, rest." Ria's hand instinctively went to the ice axe at her belt. Her muscles were coiled tight, every instinct screaming at her to retreat, to get back on the deadly path. But there was nowhere to go. Behind her was the abyss. In front of her was this silent village and this smiling man. "I'm looking for someone," she said, her voice a rough croak. She cleared her throat. "My brother, he came this way, Rohan Sharma, a climber, tall with a beard." She held her breath, watching his face for any flicker of recognition. The man's smile did not waver. Many seek solace in the high places. The mountain accepts all, but it does not always let them leave. We have seen no outsiders, not for a very long time. It was a lie. Ria could see it in the too perfect stillness of his expression. He was lying. "My name is Sanam Wangdu," the man continued, his smile fixed in place. "I am a watcher of this village. Our home is called Gankar, the White Fortress. You are the first to walk the path in a generation. You must be blessed. Come. The High Lama will wish to speak with you. You must have many questions." He turned and began to walk toward the silent village. He did not check to see if she was following. He was certain she would. Ria stood for a long moment, the frozen air burning in her lungs. The weariness in her body was a crushing weight. Her rational mind told her to accept the offer of shelter, to rest, to gather her strength. But a cold dread spread through her, a certainty that to step past the threshold of this place was to cross a line from which there would be no return. She looked at Sanam Wangdu's retreating form. He moved with a silent, fluid grace, his maroon robes a stark slash of color against the snow and dark stone. He was lying about Rohan. She was sure of it. And if he was lying, it meant her brother had made it here. He had reached the village. The question was, where was he now? With a deep, shuddering breath that did nothing to calm her racing heart, Ria took a step forward, and then another, following the watcher into the silent, perfect village of Gankar. The dread followed her, a second shadow in the thin, cold air. Chapter 2. A place without echoes. The silence within the village was heavier, more profound than the silence of the mountain. It was a deliberate, curated emptiness. The narrow streets, paved with smooth, gray flagstones, were swept clean of snow. They twisted and turned in on themselves, a disorienting maze designed to confuse. The stone houses were masterpieces of masonry, fit together without a single gap for the wind to find purchase. There were no windows on the ground floors, only heavy, carved wooden doors. From somewhere unseen, a low, monotonous humming sound emanated, a single sustained note that seemed to vibrate in Ria's teeth. People moved through the streets, but they were as silent as the stones. They were all dressed in similar robes of undyed wool, their faces placid and serene. They went about their tasks carrying water, tending to small, covered gardens with a slow, deliberate grace. As Ria passed, they would stop, turn, and offer her the same smile as Sanam Wangdu. It was a uniform expression of pleasant, vacant calm. No one spoke. No one laughed. No one's eyes held a spark of curiosity. They would smile, bow their heads, and then return to their tasks as if she had never been there. It was like walking through a gallery of living statues. Sanam Wangdu led her to the central temple, the source of the humming. Inside, the air was thick with the cloying, sweet scent of flowers and burning incense. The humming was louder here, resonating from a large, circular chamber. Peering past a heavy curtain, Ria saw the source. A dozen elderly villagers, men and women, sat in a circle on woven cushions. They were the murmur choir. Their eyes were closed, their faces masks of perfect tranquility, and from their throats came the single, continuous note that filled the entire valley. They maintain the great calm, Sanam whispered, his voice a reverent hush. He gestured for her to move on, leading her into a smaller antechamber. The room was bare except for a low table and two cushions. A single, ornate window, carved like a mandala, looked out onto the village and the colossal, snow-draped peak that loomed over it. A man sat at the table, his back to them, seemingly lost in contemplation. He was ancient, his skin as thin and translucent as parchment, stretched taut over a delicate, bird-like skull. High Lama Dorje Jayatso, Sanam announced softly. The old man turned. His eyes were a startling, pale blue, filmed over with age but holding a frighteningly sharp intelligence. He regarded Ria with a look of profound, gentle pity. "The mountain has given us a guest," the High Lama said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "It has been a long time. You are welcome here, child. You are safe." "I'm not looking for safety," Ria replied, her voice firm. "I'm looking for my brother." The High Lama's expression did not change. The search for what is lost can lead us to dangerous places. Sometimes it is wiser to accept the loss and find peace. "I won't find peace until I find him." "Peace is not found, child. It is made," he said. He gestured to the cushion opposite him. "Sit. You are agitated. Your spirit is a storm. Here in Gankar we have learned to quiet the storm. It is the only way to survive." Reluctantly, Ria sat. Sanam took up a position by the door, his hands folded, his smile unwavering. "What is this place?" Ria asked. "A sanctuary," the High Lama replied. "A refuge from the chaos. The world below is a cauldron of emotion, a storm of rage, fear, grief, and selfish desire. These things are a sickness, an infection. We call it the emotional fever. Here we have found the cure. We have achieved the great calm. His words were hypnotic, his pale eyes holding hers. Rhea had the distinct impression he was not just speaking to her, but at her, probing her mind. "My brother," she insisted, pushing against his placid sermon. He was a scientist. He detected a magnetic anomaly in this area. Did he come here? Did he speak with you? A scientist, the Lama mused, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. He seeks to measure the world, but some things cannot be measured. They can only be endured. No one of your world has been here for many years. The path is too difficult. The mountain does not allow it. He delivered the lie with such serene conviction that Rhea almost doubted her own certainty. "I have his journal," she pressed, her hand going to her pocket. "He wrote that he found the path." The mind can play tricks at this altitude. It creates phantoms. It builds hopes where there are none, the High Lama said, his voice gentle, dismissive. He raised a hand. "You are exhausted. Your body is weak, your mind clouded by grief. Rest. We will give you food and a room. In time, you will understand the peace we offer. You will see that what you search for is not worth the storm it raises inside you." It was a dismissal. The audience was over. Sanam Wangdu stepped forward and guided her from the room. As she left, Rhea glanced back. The High Lama was staring at the mandala window, but she could sense his attention was still fixed squarely on her. She was given a small, stone room in a guest house. It was sparse, containing only a sleeping platform with a thick wool blanket and a small table. There was no window. When the heavy door closed, it sealed her in a tomb of absolute silence. The humming of the choir was fainter here, a barely perceptible vibration in the stone floor. Rhea sat on the sleeping platform, her mind racing. They were lying, every one of them. The practiced smiles, the serene denials, the philosophical babble about emotional fevers. It was all a performance, a wall built to hide something. Rohan had been here. They were denying it. Why? Her gaze fell upon a small object on the table, something she had not noticed before. It was a small, humanoid figure, crudely shaped from what looked like dough. A Tsampa golem. She had seen them outside every door in the village. This one had been placed in her room while she was with the Lama. It was meant as a welcome, she supposed, a local custom. But as she picked it up, its lumpy, featureless face seemed to mock her. It felt less like a gift and more like an effigy, a warning. She set it down, a shiver running through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She was not a guest here. She was a specimen, a contamination. They were watching her, waiting for her grief and her anger, her fever to manifest. And she had the terrible suspicion that they had a cure far worse than any disease. She ate the food that was left for her, a simple stew of barley and vegetables. It was bland but nourishing. As she ate, she noticed a faint, sweet, floral scent rising from the steam. It was the same scent from the temple. The flowers. It was in the food. Putting the bowl down, she walked to the door and listened. Nothing. She pushed against it. It was not locked, but it was incredibly heavy. It took all her strength to open it a crack. The corridor outside was empty. The silent streets were bathed in the pale, blue light of dusk. She had to find proof, something they could not deny, something that proved Rohan had survived the path and entered this perfect, silent prison. Slipping out of her room, Rhea crept into the deepening shadows of Gankar. She was an infection in a sterile world, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that this place and its smiling, placid people would do whatever it took to cleanse themselves of her. Chapter 3. The Scent of Forgetting. Days in Gankar bled into one another, each a perfect, monotonous copy of the last. The sun would rise, casting long, sharp shadows across the valley. The silent villagers would emerge and begin their slow, purposeful routines. The murmur choir would begin their endless, resonant hum. The sun would set, plunging the village into a deep, frigid darkness. Rhea's attempts to investigate were met with a wall of serene, unshakable politeness. She would approach a villager asking about her brother, describing him in detail. They would listen patiently, their heads tilted, their smiles unwavering. Then they would shake their heads slowly. "No outsider has come," they would all say, the words identical as if rehearsed. "Peace be upon your search." Then they would turn and glide away, leaving her alone in the silent street. She tried to explore, to map the village in her mind, but the twisting streets always seemed to lead her back to the central plaza. The watchers, led by Sanam Wangdu, were ever present. They never confronted her, never stopped her. They simply appeared, standing silently at the end of a street she was about to take, or emerging from a doorway she was approaching. Their constant, smiling presence was a cage made of air. Her frustration grew, a hot, tight knot in her chest. She had to suppress it to mimic their calm. She learned to plaster a serene, empty smile on her own face, a mask that felt foul and foreign. She was performing for them, playing their game, because she was certain that a single outburst, a single show of the fever, would have immediate and terrible consequences. Her medic's training drove her to seek out the village healer. She feigned a headache from the altitude, a plausible excuse to learn more about their medicine. She was directed to a low building on the edge of the village, distinguished by the small, meticulously tended garden next to it. Here grew the source of the sweet, cloying scent that permeated the village. Pale, almost translucent orchids with delicate, ghost-white petals. The door opened before she knocked. A woman stood there, her hands stained with dirt from the garden. She was middle-aged, her face unlined and placid, but her eyes held a different quality from the others. They were sharp, focused, the eyes of a craftsman. This was Pema Ladin, the chirurgeon. "You have a pain in your head," Pema said. It was not a question. Her voice was a soft, soothing melody. "The mountain air is sharp. Come in." The inside of her workshop was obsessively clean. Polished wooden shelves held clay pots filled with herbs and dried flowers. On a long, smooth stone table lay a set of tools that made Rhea's blood run cold. They were not made of metal. They were obsidian, flaked to a razor's edge. Scalpels, probes, and thin, needle-like slivers, all crafted from glistening volcanic glass. "The ghost orchid," Pema said, noticing Rhea's gaze on her garden through the open door. "A gift from the mountain. It soothes the troubled mind. It helps one forget the pain." She prepared a tea, crushing the petals of one of the orchids into a small bowl. The sweet scent intensified. "Drink this. It will bring you calm." Rhea took the bowl, her hand trembling slightly. She brought it to her lips, the aroma making her head swim. This was the substance in her food, the incense in the temple, a powerful sedative, a psychoactive. She only pretended to sip, letting the warm liquid wet her lips. "You are a healer from the world below?" Pema asked, her eyes studying Ria's face. "A medic," Ria corrected. "I fix injuries." "Ah," Pema nodded, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "You mend the vessel of flesh, an honorable craft, but we have learned it is the spirit within the vessel that is the source of all suffering. A broken bone is a simple thing, a broken spirit, that requires a more delicate touch." She glanced at her obsidian tools, a flicker of pride in her placid eyes. A commotion outside drew their attention. A young man, a teenager Ria had seen before, was standing in the street, his fists clenched. It was Tenzin. He was arguing with a man who was methodically taking apart a small stone wall Tenzin had been building. His face was flushed, his voice a harsh, angry whisper. It was the first real, uncontrolled emotion Ria had witnessed since her arrival. "He is proud of his work," Tenzin hissed, his voice trembling with effort. "It is good work. Why do you undo it?" The other man did not answer. He simply continued to dismantle the wall, stone by stone, his face a mask of serene detachment. Instantly 2 watchers appeared, Sanam Wangdu among them. They did not rush. They glided toward Tenzin, their smiles gentle, pitying. "Brother Tenzin," Sanam said, his voice soft, "you have a fever, your spirit is hot, let us cool it." "No," Tenzin backed away, his eyes wide with a terror that was shockingly raw in this placid village. "I am not sick, I am angry." He shouted the last word. It echoed in the silent street, a shocking, violent sound. The villagers nearby stopped their work, their heads turning. Their expressions were not of alarm, but of sad, clinical concern, the way a doctor might observe a patient in the grips of a seizure. Sanam and the other watcher flanked him. They each took an arm, their grips gentle but inescapable. Tenzin struggled for a moment, a brief, frantic burst of rebellion. Then, as if a string had been cut, he went limp, his shoulders slumping in defeat. A single tear traced a path down his dusty cheek. "We will help you find your calm again," Sanam murmured, leading the terrified boy away. Ria watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at Pema. The chirurgeon was watching the scene with a serene, professional interest. Her gaze was not on Tenzin's face but on his head, a thoughtful, measuring look that chilled Ria to the bone. This was not about calming a boy down. This was a diagnosis, and Pema was preparing the treatment. That evening, the Tsampa golem outside Ria's door seemed more menacing than ever. The village was quieter than usual, the silence charged with a tension only she seemed to register. She knew what was going to happen to Tenzin. She didn't know the specifics, but she saw the obsidian tools in her mind, saw Pema's sharp, focused eyes. She had to get out, but more than that she had to find out what they did to Rohan. Did he get a fever? Did they try to cure him too? As she paced her small, dark room, a frantic, caged animal, she heard a faint scratching at her door. It was not a knock. It was a sound so soft she almost dismissed it as a rodent. She pressed her ear to the heavy wood. Silence. Then the scratch again. Holding her breath, she slowly, carefully pulled the door open a few inches. The hallway was dark and empty. She was about to close it when she saw it. A small, flat stone on the floor just outside her threshold. It had not been there before. She picked it up. It was cold and smooth. On its underside, a single word was scratched, crude and sharp. Tonight. Underneath it was a simple drawing, a crescent moon and a symbol for a roof. Ria's blood ran cold. It was a message, a rendezvous, but from whom? An ally in this village of smiling automatons seemed impossible. It had to be a trap. Sanam Wangdu testing her, luring her out into the open where her fever of suspicion and fear could be plainly observed and diagnosed. She stood in her dark room, the stone cold in her palm. It was a trap. It had to be. But it was also the first crack in the perfect, silent wall of Gankar. It was the first sign that someone in this village was not calmed. It was a risk she had to take. Clutching the stone, she waited for the deepest part of the night, for the moon to rise over the white fortress. Trap or not, she would be there. Chapter 4: A Fever in the Blood. The cold of the night was a physical presence. It sank its teeth into Ria the moment she slipped out of the guest house. The moon was a sliver of bone-white light, casting the village in a stark relief of ink-black shadows and pale, ghostly stone. The humming of the murmur choir had ceased, and the silence was now absolute, so deep it felt like a pressure against her eardrums. She moved through the shadows, her body a taut wire of tension. She kept to the edges of the streets, her feet silent on the cold flagstones. The village felt different at night. The empty, smiling serenity was gone, replaced by a watchful, predatory stillness. She saw the silhouettes of watchers on the rooftops, unmoving sentinels against the star-dusted sky. This was not a random patrol. They were waiting. They were hunting. The message was a trap. The meeting spot was the roof of the communal storehouse, a long, low building near the village's edge. Getting there required climbing a stack of firewood in a dark alleyway and pulling herself up onto the rough slate roof. She lay flat on the icy tiles, her breath plumbing in front of her face, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She scanned the surrounding rooftops. Nothing. The watchers were there, she could sense them, but they were hidden in the darkness. She waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The cold seeped through her layers of clothing, numbing her to the core. This was a fool's errand. She was exposed, a target. She was about to retreat when a shadow detached itself from a nearby chimney stack. It moved with a fluid, silent grace, low to the roof, using the darkness as a cloak. It was not a watcher. The watchers were deliberate calm. This figure was tense, hurried. The figure reached her, and a hand clamped down over her mouth before she could react. A face loomed over hers in the dim moonlight. It was a young woman, her features sharp and angular. Her eyes were wide, burning with an intensity that was utterly alien to this village. It was a face Ria had noticed before, one that never held the same vacant smile as the others. Not a sound, the woman whispered, her voice a fierce, low hiss. She removed her hand slowly. They are everywhere. Who are you? Ria breathed, her own voice barely audible. My name is Lamo. She did not offer a smile. Her expression was a tight mask of controlled fury. My brother was like yours, not from here. He was a traitor. They said he had the fever. The words hit Rhea like a physical blow. What did they do to him? The same thing they will do to the boy, Tenzin. The same thing they did to your brother, Lamo said, her voice laced with a venomous grief. They calmed him. They performed the rite of unbecoming. The name of the ritual was as obscene as the act Rhea imagined. The chirurgeon, Pema. Lamo nodded sharply. She is the instrument. The High Lama is the hand that guides it. They call it a cure, a release from suffering. They are liars. It is murder. They murder the soul and leave the body to walk around and smile. Her hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists. This was the source of the village's tension. This woman's rage, hidden beneath a carefully constructed exterior, was a fire in a world of ice. My brother, Rohan, you saw him. Rhea's voice was desperate. I saw him, Lamo confirmed. He was strong, he fought them, he screamed. I had never heard anyone scream like that before. They said his fever was the worst they had ever seen. She looked away toward the dark peak that loomed over them. After the rite, he did not scream anymore. He did not do anything. He just sat arranging stones in the garden for a week. Then one morning he was gone. They said the mountain had reclaimed him. Another lie. A cold, heavy certainty settled in Rhea's stomach. Choden, the artist she had seen, the man arranging river stones. Was that what happened to the ones who were too broken to even smile correctly? Why are you helping me? Rhea asked, studying the young woman's taut profile. Because you are the first person to come here since they took my brother. You are the first person whose eyes are not empty, Lamo said, turning back to her, her gaze burning. And because you carry the same fever I do, revenge. I want them to pay for what they did. You want to know what happened to your brother. Our paths are the same. What is the right? Rhea asked, the medic in her needing to know the clinical horror. What do they actually do? They take them to the chamber of release. It is a room behind Pema's workshop built into the ice of the glacier. It is soundproof, Lamo explained, her voice dropping lower. Pema uses the ghost orchid to sedate them to make them compliant. Then, she uses her tools, the obsidian. She cuts something deep inside the head. She severs the root of all feeling. When it is done, the person is gone. Only the shell remains. The description, crude as it was enough. A transorbital lobotomy. A barbaric procedure abandoned by the outside world for its horrific, dehumanizing effects. Here, it was not just medicine, it was religion. They are doing it to Tenzin tonight, Rhea stated, the pieces clicking into place. Lamo nodded. The chamber is heavily guarded, but I know a way to see inside, an old ice chute for meltwater. It runs past a small fissure high on the chamber wall. You can see and you can hear. We have to stop them. Lamo looked at her, and for the first time a flicker of something like pity crossed her face. Stop them. You are one person. I am one person. They are a village. We cannot stop them, but you can be a witness. You can see the truth of this place with your own eyes. You can find the proof you need. Proof? Your brother was a fighter, Lamo said. During his procedure, there was a struggle. He broke one of Pema's tools, and he tore a pouch from her belt. She keeps her spare instruments in it. It fell behind a storage chest. I saw it. I think it is still there. His tracks are gone, his body is gone, but that pouch, that is proof he was in that room. A plan began to form in Rhea's mind. desperate and dangerous. We need a diversion, something to draw the watchers away from the chamber. Lamo's lips pulled into a grim, mirthless smile. The bell of forgetting, in the central plaza, it has not been rung in a century. The Lama says its sound can shatter a fevered mind. The watchers are terrified of it. They believe it can erase them. If someone were to strike it, every watcher in the village would converge on the plaza. Is someone? I will do it, Lamo said, her eyes glittering with a reckless fire. It will give you the time you need to get to the ice chute. Be there when the bell rings. Move fast. See what they do. Find your proof. Then get out. I will meet you back at the path entrance before sunrise. It was a suicidal plan. Lamo would be caught. She would be taken to the chamber of release herself. They will catch you, Rhea said. Let them, Lamo replied, her voice a low, chilling whisper. I am tired of hiding my fever. Let them see it burn. She gave Rhea a set of swift, precise directions, a path through back alleys and over frozen canals that would lead to the rear of Pema's workshop. There was no more time for talk. Lamo squeezed Rhea's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Do not let them see you. Do not let them calm you. Then she was gone, melting back into the shadows as silently as she had appeared. Rhea was alone again on the frozen rooftop, the fate of a boy and the truth of her brother's disappearance now resting on the desperate act of a grieving, vengeful woman. She took a deep breath, the icy air a shock to her system. She could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of chanting beginning from the direction of the temple. The rite was beginning. She had to move. Now. Chapter 5. The Rite of Unbecoming. Following Lamo's instructions, Rhea navigated a treacherous, unseen version of the village. She scrambled down from the roof into a narrow passage choked with snowdrifts, a space between buildings the villagers never used. The walls were slick with ice. The only light came from the sliver of moon above. The chanting grew louder, a monotonous drone that seemed to make the very air vibrate. It was a sound designed to soothe, to hypnotize, but to Rhea, it was the sound of a countdown. She reached the back of Pema Ladin's workshop. Here, the manicured perfection of the village gave way to the raw, untamed power of the mountain. The rear of the building was fused with the immense blue-white wall of a glacier. A door, reinforced with iron bands, was set deep into the ice itself. This was the entrance to the chamber of release. Two watchers stood before it, their forms perfectly still, their smiling faces illuminated by the eerie, internal glow of the glacial ice. To the left of the door was the ice chute Lamo had described, a shallow channel carved to direct meltwater away from the building's foundation. It was steep, a treacherous ladder of slick, uneven ice. Rhea began to climb, her numb fingers searching for purchase, her boots scraping for a hold. The cold from the glacier was intense, a dead, absolute cold that felt ancient. It leached the warmth from her body, and with every foot she gained, the chanting grew clearer, now mixed with a soft, melodic voice. Pema's voice. She reached the fissure. It was a narrow, vertical crack in the ice wall, no wider than her hand, frosted over with a delicate lacework of ice crystals. Carefully, using the tip of her knife, she scraped away the frost, creating a small, clear peephole. She pressed her eye to the opening. The world went silent. The chamber of release was a hemispherical room carved from the living ice. The walls glowed with a faint blue trapped light, making the space feel submerged underwater. It was completely bare except for a single low stone chair in the center. Tenzin was strapped to it, his wrists and ankles bound with leather straps. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have paralyzed him. He was not fighting. He was simply enduring. High Lama Dorje Gyatso stood to one side, his hands folded, his eyes closed, his lips moving silently with the chant. Pema Ladin stood before the boy. She was not smiling. Her face was a mask of intense professional concentration. She held a small clay bowl from which she was applying a thick white paste to Tenzin's temples. The ghost orchid. "Hush now, little brother," Pema murmured, her voice a gentle lullaby that was horrifically at odds with the scene. "The fever is loud. The calm is quiet. We will give you the quiet. We will release you from the storm." Tenzin whimpered, a thin, pathetic sound that was swallowed by the thick ice walls. "Please. I will be calm, I promise. I will not be angry again." "Anger is not a choice, child," the High Lama's dry voice cut in, his eyes still closed. "It is a sickness, a fire. We do not punish the fire, we quench it." Pema set the bowl aside and picked up one of her obsidian tools. It was a thin, elegant sliver, sharpened to a wicked point. Rhea, the medic, knew instantly what she was about to do, a precise, brutal act of psychosurgery. She felt a wave of nausea, her own anger a hot, bile-like surge in her throat. Suddenly, a sound shattered the night. Gong! A deep, resonant toll that was not merely heard but felt, a vibration that shook the very foundations of the village. It was the bell of forgetting. Lamo had done it. Inside the chamber, every head snapped up. The Lama's eyes flew open, a flicker of genuine shock in their pale depths. Pema froze, the obsidian sliver held inches from Tenzin's eye. Through the fissure, Rhea could hear panicked shouts from outside, the sound of running feet. The diversion was working. The two watchers guarding the door were gone, sprinting toward the plaza. The High Lama looked at Pema. "Finish it. The cacophony must not disturb the rite." Pema hesitated for only a second, then her face hardened back into a mask of concentration. She turned back to the terrified boy. This was Rhea's chance. While their attention was on the bell and the boy, Rhea's eyes scanned the periphery of the room, and she saw it. Tucked in the shadow of a large wooden chest against the far wall was a small leather pouch. It was dark, stained, and a small metal buckle on its strap glinted in the blue light. It was exactly as Lamo had described. But next to it was something else, something that made Rhea's breath catch in her throat. A climbing axe. It was propped against the chest, almost hidden. It was a modern design with a carbon fiber shaft and a distinctive bright orange grip. It was Rohan's axe. She would recognize it anywhere. He had been here, in this very room. He had been strapped to that same chair. Pema moved closer to Tenzin, the obsidian needle poised. Rhea had her proof, but she could not leave. She could not let this happen. Her mind raced, a frantic search for a weapon, a plan, anything. Her eyes fell on the ice chute, the meltwater, the angle. The bell tolled again, a discordant, frantic clang this time, as if Lamo were striking it wildly. Pema ignored it. She placed the fingers of her left hand on Tenzin's eyelid, forcing it open. The boy let out a choked sob. Without thinking, Rhea acted. She jammed the sleeve of her parka into the top of the ice chute, creating a makeshift dam. Then she began to claw at the snow and ice packed around her, shoving it into the channel. It was a desperate, clumsy effort. She needed more. She looked up. High above her, a thick cornice of snow and ice clung to the edge of the roof. She unclipped her axe from her belt. With a surge of adrenaline, she swung it upward, sinking the pick deep into the base of the cornice. She pulled, her muscles screaming in protest. A crack appeared. She swung again and again. The ice groaned. With a final, desperate heave, a huge section of the overhanging ice and snow broke free and crashed down onto the roof, sliding directly into the blocked chute. The effect inside the chamber was instantaneous. A powerful, focused torrent of ice, snow, and freezing water erupted from a drain at the base of the wall, spraying across the floor. It hit the High Lama with enough force to knock the ancient man off his feet. He cried out, a sound of shock and pain. Pema spun around, her concentration broken. The obsidian sliver slipped from her grasp, clattering on the stone floor. For a moment, the room was chaos. It was the opening Rhea needed. She slid down the chute, her body battered by the ice, and landed hard on the ground. The door to the chamber was unguarded. She burst through it. The scene that greeted her was one of stunned confusion. The High Lama was struggling to rise, his robe soaked. Pema was staring at the drain, her face a mask of disbelief. Tenzin was forgotten, still strapped to the chair, his face a mixture of terror and dawning hope. Rhea's focus was singular. She sprinted for the chest. She grabbed the leather pouch and Rohan's axe, her fingers closing around the familiar orange grip. The feel of it in her hand was both a comfort and a spike of absolute rage. "You!" Pema shrieked, her placid composure finally shattering. She lunged for Rhea. Rhea did not hesitate. She swung the blunt hammer end of the axe in a short, brutal arc, catching Pema hard in the shoulder. The chirurgeon stumbled back with a cry of pain, her arm hanging uselessly at her side. The High Lama was on his feet now, his face a terrifying rictus of fury. The mask of serenity was gone, revealing the fanatic beneath. "Sacrilege! You have disturbed the great calm. You are a plague." From the corner of her eye, Rhea saw movement. Sanam Wangdu stood in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. His smile was gone. His face was a thunder cloud. There was no way out through the door. Rhea backed away toward the chair. Tenzin was staring at her, his eyes pleading. With two swift chops from the axe's blade, she severed the leather straps binding his wrists. "Run," she told him, her voice a low command. Then she turned to face the Watcher and the Lama, Rohan's axe held ready in her hands. She had the pouch. She had the axe. She had a witness. She had her proof. But she was trapped, deep in the heart of their sacred, profane chamber, with the village's two most powerful figures between her and the exit. The trap she had walked into upon arrival had finally snapped shut. Chapter 6. The Gnasher of Minds. The tableau held for a frozen second. Rhea with the axe, Tenzin scrambling to his feet behind her, Pema clutching her shoulder. the High Lama radiating a pure, cold fury and Sonam Wangdu blocking the only exit, his face stripped of its serene mask, revealing the hard, unforgiving fanatic beneath. The frantic, discordant clang of the bell of forgetting was the only sound, a death knell for the village's hollow peace. "You have brought the storm into the quiet place," the High Lama hissed, his voice a sibilant threat. "The fever will consume you all." Sonam took a step forward, his hands raised, ready to disarm her. Rhea didn't give him the chance. She was not a fighter, but she had Rohan's survival instincts. She swung the axe again, not at a person, but at the ice wall beside her. The pick slammed deep into the ancient blue ice. A spiderweb of cracks radiated from the impact. "The next one goes through your skull," Rhea snarled, the words tasting like acid. The raw emotion felt good. It felt powerful. Sonam paused. He had seen the speed of her first strike. He was not smiling now. "Tenzin, the drain," Rhea shouted, not taking her eyes off the watcher. The boy, shaking but alive with a desperate, newfound fire, understood. He grabbed the heavy wooden chest, the one that had hidden Rohan's axe, and with a strength born of terror shoved it over. It crashed onto its side, revealing the outflow drain for the chute Rhea had flooded. With frantic energy, Tenzin began kicking and clawing at the blockage of snow and ice she had created. The High Lama saw the strategy instantly. "Stop them." But it was too late. The dam broke. A fresh torrent of freezing water and icy sludge gushed into the room, far stronger this time. It swirled around their ankles, a numbing, shocking cold. Sonam stumbled as the floor became a slick sheet of ice. The High Lama was knocked off balance again. "Now," Rhea yelled. She shoved Tenzin toward a dark opening in the back of the chamber, a meltwater tunnel that had been hidden by the chest. "Go." Tenzin scrambled into the darkness. Rhea backed away, keeping the axe between herself and the villagers. Pema was trying to rise, her face contorted in pain and rage. The Lama was chanting again, a low, guttural sound, his hands outstretched. It wasn't a prayer. It felt like a curse. "The Semnai will feast on your rage," he shrieked, his voice echoing unnaturally in the ice chamber. "It will peel the thoughts from your skull. I release the locks. I summon the hunger." A wave of dizziness washed over Rhea. The air grew thick, heavy with a pressure that had nothing to do with altitude. A low, subsonic hum started, not in her ears but inside her head. Sonam, recovering his footing, charged. Rhea swung the axe and he dodged, but the momentary distraction was all she needed. She turned and plunged into the dark tunnel after Tenzin, the sound of the Lama's terrible curse chasing her into the frozen heart of the mountain. The tunnel was a nightmare of claustrophobic, slick ice. It was utterly black. She could hear Tenzin ahead of her, his panicked gasps and the scrape of his boots. Behind her, she could hear the relentless, steady pursuit of Sonam Wangdu. He was at home in this darkness, as silent and sure-footed as a snow leopard. The hum inside her head grew louder. It was a sound and a feeling, a vibration that seemed to loosen the moorings of her thoughts. Strange colors bloomed at the edge of her vision. She felt a phantom touch on her neck, cold and sharp. "What is this?" Tenzin cried out from the darkness ahead. His voice was thin, terrified. I can't think." Keep moving, Rhea ordered, though her own mind was starting to fray. Grief for Rohan, a raw, gaping wound, tore open in her mind. She saw his face, not as the empty shell in Lamo's story, but smiling, vibrant on the day he left for his expedition. "Don't worry, Rhea," his voice echoed in her memory, so clear it felt real. "It's just another mountain." The memory was a comfort and then a weapon. The joy of it curdled into agony. The love she felt for him became a tool of torture, twisting into the shape of her failure to save him. The psychic pressure intensified. This was the Nasher of minds. It wasn't a beast of tooth and claw. It was a parasite of the soul. It fed on what she was. The tunnel opened into a cavern. The space was vast, filled with a faint blue luminescence from the ice. Massive icicles, like the teeth of some colossal beast, hung from the ceiling. Tenzin was on his knees in the center of the cavern, clutching his head, screaming without a sound. Rhea staggered toward him, fighting the waves of psychic venom. Her own fears swirled around her. The sterile beep of a heart monitor flatlining. The accusing eyes of a patient she couldn't save. The cold, empty dread of being utterly alone. The Semnai was a master diagnostician, finding every trauma, every weakness, and pressing on it with surgical precision. Then she saw Sanam Wangdu step out of the tunnel. He was holding a length of rope, a noose in his hand. His face was calm, but his eyes were fixed on a point in the air above Rhea's head, a look of cautious reverence on his face. He was not suffering as she was. His calmed mind offered no purchase, no rich feast of emotion for the entity. He was a ghost at the banquet. "It is here," Sanam said, his voice abnormally loud in the cavern. "The great spirit of the mountain, it has come for your fevered souls. Surrender to the right and it will not find you tasteful." The pressure in Rhea's head became unbearable. The world began to dissolve into a kaleidoscopic nightmare. She was losing. Her anger, her grief, her fear. The very things that made her human were the fuel for her own destruction. The Lama's curse was not just a threat, it was a promise. He had undone the locks and the beast was now feeding. She saw Tenzin begin to convulse, his mind being ripped apart. She had to do something. She couldn't fight it. It was like fighting the air itself. The Lama's words echoed in her mind. "Peace is not found. It is made. We have learned to quiet the storm." That was it. She couldn't extinguish the storm. That was what the right did. But maybe she could quiet it. She dropped to her knees beside Tenzin, grabbing his shoulders. He flinched, his eyes unseeing. "Tenzin, listen to me," she said, her voice a raw command. "Stop fighting it. Don't feed it." She closed her own eyes, turning her focus inward. She let the grief for Rohan wash over her, let the rage at the Lama burn through her veins, let the terror of their situation consume her. But instead of letting it run wild, she gathered it. She pictured it as a raging fire in her chest. And then, with every ounce of will she possessed, she began to starve it of air. She did not extinguish it. She banked it, turning the wild, chaotic blaze into a single, white-hot, focused coal of pure, cold determination. The psychic pressure lessened. The phantoms receded. The hum in her head faded to a distant buzz. She opened her eyes. The world was solid again. Sanam Wangdu was staring at her, a look of stunned disbelief on his face. He had felt the change. He had felt the banquet being pulled away from the guest. The Semnai was still there, a lingering presence, a hunger held at bay. But the immediate assault was over. Rhea had found a weapon, not the absence of emotion, but the absolute control of it. She got to her feet, pulling the trembling, whimpering Tenzin with her. She held Rohan's axe in a white-knuckled grip, its cold weight a grounding reality. She was a medic, a scientist, a pragmatist. And now she was something else. She was a storm that had learned to quiet itself. And in the absolute predatory silence of the glacier, that made her the most dangerous thing in the mountain. Chapter 7: The Stillborn. The cavern was a temporary sanctuary. The psychic presence lingered at the edges, a predator waiting for a moment of weakness, but the focused, calm Rhea projected seemed to act as a shield. Tenzin huddled beside her, his body racked with tremors. His mind had been grazed by the entity, and the experience had left him shattered. Its voice, it was inside me, he whispered, his own voice hoarse. It showed me, the table, the needle. He shuddered violently. It feeds on fear, Rhea said, her voice low and steady. She performed a quick neurological check, examining his pupils, testing his responses. He was coherent but deeply traumatized. We cannot give it anything to eat. We have to stay calm. It sounded like an impossible order. Sanam Wangdu had not moved. He stood at the far end of the cavern, watching them. He was confused. His entire worldview was predicated on a simple binary, the chaos of emotion or the peace of the great calm. Rhea represented a third option he could not comprehend. His certainty was broken, and in its place was a sliver of fear. "There is no escape," he called out, his voice a strained attempt at authority. "Every tunnel leads back to the village or deeper into the ice. Surrender, and the chirurgeon will grant you the mercy of quiet." "Tell me where my brother is," Rhea demanded, her voice echoing in the vast, icy space. "The climber, the one you brought to the chamber of release." Sanam's face hardened. He was consumed by his fever, a tragic case. The mountain reclaimed him. It was the same lie, the same empty words. Rhea knew then that arguing was pointless. She turned her back on him, a calculated act of dismissal. She scanned the cavern. It was a dead end, except for one other tunnel, smaller and darker than the one they had entered through. "We go deeper," she told Tenzin. "Stay close to me. Focus on my voice. Nothing else is real." She led him toward the new tunnel, half supporting his trembling frame. Sanam did not follow immediately. He was waiting, letting the mountain do his work for him. The new passage was narrower, a natural fissure in the glacier. As they moved through it, a new sound reached them, faint at first, then growing louder. It was a low, mournful groaning, a chorus of despair that seemed to emanate from the ice itself. It was a sound of pure, unending misery. The tunnel opened into another, even larger cavern. This one was different. The air was warmer, filled with a foul, organic stench, and it was not empty. Figures shambled in the dim blue light, dozens of them. They were wrapped in the same undyed robes as the villagers, but their bodies were twisted, their movements clumsy and uncoordinated. Some dragged their limbs. Others rocked back and forth, staring at the ice walls. Their faces were slack, their eyes unfocused. and from their throats came the unending, sorrowful moans. This was a place of ghosts, a boneyard for the living. "What is this place?" Tenzin whispered, his voice trembling with horror. Rhea knew instantly. This was the village's garbage dump. This was where they threw away the people who couldn't even be calmed correctly. The botched surgeries, the ones whose minds shattered completely under Pema's obsidian scalpel, the stillborn. Her eyes scanned the crowd of broken people, a cold dread coiling in her stomach. She was looking for one face, one form, and then she saw him. He was sitting in a corner away from the others, his back to them. He was taller than the rest, his frame broader. He was methodically picking up shards of fallen ice and arranging them into complex, geometric patterns on the ground. A wave of vertigo washed over Rhea. It was exactly what Lamo had described. She approached him slowly, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. Tenzin stayed behind, too terrified to move. "Rohan," she whispered. The name felt like a shard of glass in her throat. The figure did not turn. He continued his work, his focus absolute, his hands moving with a delicate, obsessive precision. Rhea moved around him, her boots crunching on the ice. She needed to see his face. She needed to be sure. She knelt in front of him. His hair was long and matted. A thick, unkempt beard covered the lower half of his face, but it was him. Beneath the grime and the madness, it was her brother. His eyes were open, but they saw nothing. They were the eyes of a stranger, vacant, clouded, focused on a world she could not see. There was no recognition in them, no memory, no soul. The man she had spent her life loving, the brother she had crossed the world to find, was gone. This was just the shell he had left behind. She reached out a trembling hand and touched his arm. "Rohan, it's me. It's Rhea." He flinched at her touch. He pulled his arm away, a low, distressed sound coming from his throat. He looked at her through her, his eyes wide with a vague, animal fear. He did not know her. She was just a disruption to his endless, meaningless task. A sound escaped Rhea's lips, a ragged, choked sob. The careful, disciplined wall she had built around her emotions crumbled into dust. The white-hot coal of her determination exploded back into a raging, uncontrollable inferno of pure, undiluted grief. The pain was absolute. It was a physical thing, tearing her apart from the inside. And the moment it erupted, the psychic presence returned. It did not creep back this time. It slammed into the cavern like a physical force. The low moaning of the stillborn instantly pitched into high, terrified shrieks. They clutched their heads, convulsed, their rudimentary minds being shredded by an entity drawn to a feast more powerful than any it had tasted before. Rohan screamed. It was a hollow, mindless sound, the shriek of a terrified animal. Rhea was on her knees, consumed by her own agony, barely aware of the psychic onslaught she had unleashed. She had found him, and she had lost him. The truth of it was a horror far greater than any monster. Sonam Wangdu appeared at the cavern entrance, his face grim. He had been waiting for this. He had been waiting for her fever to break. The Nasher of Minds descended upon the cavern, drawn to the raw, powerful agony of a sister's heart breaking. The feast had begun. Chapter 8: The Eye of the Peak. The psychic storm was absolute. Ria's grief was the epicenter, a beacon of pure emotional energy that the Semnai latched onto, amplifying it, feeding on it. The cavern became a vortex of shared terror. The stillborn thrashed and wailed, their broken minds offering no defense. Rohan was on the ground, curled into a ball, his screams raw and constant. Ria was drowning in her own sorrow. It was a warm, dark, welcoming sea. It would be so easy to let go, to let it consume her, to join her brother in the quiet of oblivion. Ria! A hand grabbed her arm, pulling her hard. It was Tenzin. His face was a mask of terror, but his eyes were clear. He was holding onto his sanity by a thread. "We have to go, it's killing them," he yelled, his voice barely audible over the psychic din. The sight of his terrified face, of the boy she had promised to protect, was an anchor. It was a pinprick of light in the crushing darkness. She looked at Rohan, her brother, the empty shell. There was nothing she could do for him. He was already gone, but Tenzin was still here. The medic in her took over. Triage. Save the one you can save. With a wrenching, physical effort, she pulled her mind back from the abyss. She rebuilt the wall, not out of calm this time, but out of pure, pragmatic necessity. She packed the grief away, locking it in a lead-lined box in her heart. She would deal with it later, if there was a later. "This way," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. She grabbed Tenzin's hand and pulled him toward a dark crevice on the far side of the cavern, away from Sanam Wangdu. They scrambled over the icy ground, past the writhing forms of the stillborn. She did not look back at her brother. She couldn't. As they reached the crevice, a figure emerged from it, moving fast. Ria raised the axe, ready to strike. "Wait," a voice hissed. It was Lamo. Her face was bruised, her robes torn, but her eyes burned with the same furious fire. "The bell, I barely escaped," she said, her words coming in ragged gasps. "I knew they would dump him here, my brother. They put him here too." The shared tragedy hung in the air between them, a terrible, unspoken bond. Sanam Wangdu was advancing into the cavern now. The psychic storm was abating slightly as Ria regained control, but it was still a dangerous, chaotic tempest. Even Sanam moved cautiously, his face tight with strain. He was not immune, merely resistant. "We can't go back," Lamo said, gesturing behind her. "This passage leads up. Inside the mountain, it's the only way." "Up where?" Ria demanded. "Toward the source," Lamo replied, her gaze flicking upward as if she could see through the thousands of feet of rock and ice above them. "The Semnai is not a spirit, it is a prisoner, and the High Lama is its jailer." She pulled them into the narrow passage as Sanam and two more watchers who had joined him began to close in. The tunnel was a steep, natural chimney, forcing them into a desperate vertical climb. "The stories are all wrong," Lamo explained as they climbed, her voice echoing in the tight space. "The Lama doesn't protect us from the Nasherev mines. He uses it. The great calm, the right, the murmur choir. It's all a machine, a psychic dam. The vacant minds of the calmed generate a field of psychic null, a wall of silence that keeps the entity contained within this valley." Ria's mind reeled. It was a monstrous, insane kind of logic. So the entity is real. It's real, Lamo confirmed. And it's trapped. There's a crystal at the very peak of the mountain. The legends call it the Eye of the Peak. It's some kind of amplifier. It focuses the entity's power, but also its prison. The Lama's control is absolute. He uses the threat of the beast to enforce his cure. He creates the sickness and sells the poison as medicine. A new, cold anger began to replace Ria's grief. It was the anger of understanding. This entire village, this entire system of torture and control was built on a lie. "Is there a way to stop it?" Tenzin asked, his voice trembling but full of a new resolve. "The legends speak of a true song," Lamo said. "A way to shatter the crystal, not just dampen its power. To destroy the amplifier and set the prisoner free." "Free?" Ria questioned, the implications chilling. "If it's unleashed from the valley?" "It might dissipate, it might be destroyed, or it might consume the world," Lamo finished grimly. "The Lama chose containment. Our ancestors chose freedom. I would rather face the storm than live in his silent cage." Their climb grew steeper. After what felt like an hour, the tunnel opened onto a narrow, man-made ledge. They had emerged inside the foundations of the monastery. Below them, they could see the cavern of the stillborn. Above them, the mountain continued its ascent. They were inside the walls of the fortress. Their respite was short-lived. Sanam Wangdu and his watchers emerged from the chimney behind them. They were cornered. "There is nowhere left to run," Sanam said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion now. He and his men advanced slowly along the narrow ledge. Lamo looked at Ria, a desperate, wild light in her eyes. She drew a long, wicked-looking knife from her robes. "I will not be calmed," she snarled. Tenzin, seeing the obsidian tools of his nightmares in his mind, grabbed a loose rock. The fight was brutal and clumsy, a desperate scramble on a narrow ledge over a pit of horrors. Ria used the axe, its weight and reach her only advantage. Lamo fought like a cornered animal, all speed and fury. Tenzin threw his rock, striking one of the watchers in the head and sending him staggering. Sanam focused on Ria. He was faster than he looked, his movements economical and precise. He dodged a swing of her axe and lunged, trying to grapple with her. Ria slammed the butt of the axe into his gut, knocking the wind out of him, but he managed to grab her arm. They struggled, dangerously close to the edge. Lamo dispatched one watcher with a vicious slash to his leg, incapacitating him. But the other grabbed her from behind. Tenzin, seeing her struggle, charged, tackling the watcher around the waist. All three of them went down in a heap. Ria, struggling against Sanam's iron grip, managed to wrench her arm free. She swung the axe in a flat, desperate arc. Sanam ducked, but she had not been aiming for his head. The pick of the axe slammed into the stone wall beside him, spraying rock chips. While he was momentarily distracted, she drove her boot into his knee. She heard a sickening pop and he cried out, his leg buckling. He collapsed onto the ledge, his face a mask of agony. They had won, for now. Lamo had a deep cut on her arm and Tenzin was bruised, but they were alive. They stood over the groaning, defeated watchers. Lamo looked at Ria. "Now what?" Ria looked up into the dark, humming core of the monastery above them. Her path was clear. They couldn't go back down. She had found her brother, and in doing so, had found a horror that eclipsed her personal grief. This wasn't about Rohan anymore. This was about tearing down the entire monstrous machine. "Now," Rhea said, her voice hard as the mountain stone, "we go up. We find the eye, and we shatter it." Chapter 9. The Murmur Choir. The passages upward were a testament to forgotten centuries. They were not meant for men, but for air, for the mountain to breathe. Lamo led them through the tight, oppressive darkness. Her knowledge of the monastery's hidden ways a grim inheritance. Rhea tore a strip from her own clothes to bind Lamo's bleeding arm. They moved in silence, their only light a stolen oil lamp that cast their monstrous, dancing shadows against the ancient stones. As they climbed, the hum grew stronger. It was no longer a background vibration, but a palpable force that pressed in on them, sinking into their bones. It was a sound of absolute psychic peace, and it was agonizing. It promised an end to fear, to grief, to anger. It promised emptiness. Rhea felt her resolve begin to fray, the sharp edges of her anger softening into a dull, weary sorrow. The thought of simply stopping, of lying down on the cold stone and letting the quiet take her, was a seductive poison. "Don't listen to it," Lamo hissed, her face pale with effort. She shook Tenzin, whose eyelids were drooping. "It's a false peace. It's the song of the cage. Remember what they tried to do to you, Tenzin. Remember the needle." The boy's eyes snapped open, a fresh wave of terror washing the lethargy away. Fear, Rhea realized, was their only antidote to the Lama's psychic anesthetic. They had to keep the fever alive to survive. They emerged into a vast, circular chamber, and the source of the hum was revealed. It was a place of breathtaking, horrifying design. The room was a massive resonance chamber, the walls curving up to a high, vaulted ceiling. Directly in the center of the ceiling was the eye of the peak, a colossal, flawless crystal, easily 20 feet across. It was not lit from without. It pulsed with a soft, internal, milky white light. It was alive. And beneath it, arranged in concentric circles, sat the Murmur Choir. There were at least 50 of them, the most ancient and calmed of the village elders. They were not merely sitting in meditation. They were wired into a grotesque machine. Thin, copper filaments ran from circlets on their heads to a massive, bronze, bowl-shaped object that sat on a pedestal in the center of the room. Their faces were slack, their eyes rolled back in their heads. They were not humming voluntarily. The machine was drawing the psychic energy from them, using them as living batteries, focusing their collective emptiness through the bronze resonator and up into the eye. This was the psychic dam. It was powered by the last vestiges of life from these comatose elders. And standing beside the resonator, his hand resting on it as if it were a beloved pet, was High Lama Dorje Gyatso. He was not looking at them. He was looking up at the crystal, a look of paternal pride on his ancient face. "Magnificent, is it not?" he said without turning around. "The sound of true peace, the architecture of a world without pain." Pema Ladin stepped out from behind a stone pillar, her uninjured arm holding a long, wicked-looking obsidian knife. Her face was swollen and bruised, but her eyes were filled with a righteous, cold fury. She was no longer a healer. She was an executioner. "They have defiled the sacred spaces," Pema said, her voice devoid of its former gentleness. "They have broken the calm." The High Lama finally turned. He showed no surprise, no anger, only a deep, weary disappointment. "I had hoped you would understand. I had hoped you would see the beauty of our work. We take the chaos of the human soul, its petty rages, its selfish griefs, and we transform it. We turn it into a wall that protects the world from a far greater chaos." He gestured to the crystal above. "That, the Semnai, is the natural state of consciousness, pure, ravenous, emotional hunger. It is what your kind will become without guidance. I have saved you from yourselves." "You've created a living hell," Rhea shot back, raising her axe. "You mutilate people. You turn them into living ghosts, or you throw them away in a cave to rot." "Regrettable but necessary sacrifices," the Lama said, his voice utterly reasonable. "To build a paradise, some stones must be discarded. You see only the individual, I see the species. Your compassion is a flaw, a weakness. It is the heart of the fever." He raised a hand and the humming in the room intensified. The psychic pressure returned tenfold. Rhea felt a vision slam into her mind. Rohan, whole and healthy, standing on a sun-drenched peak. He was smiling at her. "Let it go, Rhea," he said, his voice full of love. "It doesn't have to hurt anymore. Come with me. Be at peace." It was a perfect, beautiful lie. Beside her, Lamo cried out, stumbling back. "No, no," she whispered, staring at an empty space where she clearly saw her own lost brother. But the Lama had miscalculated. He did not understand Tenzin. The boy was not a medic hardened by loss or a woman fueled by years of vengeful rage. He was a teenager whose greatest fear had almost become a reality only hours ago. The Lama's psychic assault did not offer him peace. It threw him straight back into the chamber of release. Tenzin screamed. It was not a sound of fear this time. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated, defiant rage. It was the sound of a cornered animal deciding to fight back. "No," he bellowed, the word a raw, explosive rejection of everything the Lama stood for. He charged, not at the Lama, not at Pema. He ran straight for the machine, for the bronze, resonating bowl. Pema tried to intercept him, but he was too fast. He ignored her, his focus absolute. He reached the pedestal and with all his strength threw his shoulder into it. The bowl tilted. The elders of the choir groaned as the connection flickered. The hum faltered, dropping in pitch. The High Lama's face contorted in a snarl of pure fury. "The boy, stop him." But it was too late. Tenzin, in a final act of rebellion against the quiet, grabbed the edge of the heavy bronze bowl and heaved. The pedestal tipped over. The bowl crashed to the stone floor with a deafening, discordant clang. The copper filaments ripped free from the elders' heads. The humming stopped. The psychic dam, held in place for generations, broke. A silence. Then from the eye of the peak above, a light began to grow. The soft, milky glow turned into a burning, malevolent crimson. A soundless, psychic scream erupted from the crystal, a wave of pure, untethered consciousness that slammed down into the room. Pema and the Lama cried out, clutching their heads. Even their disciplined minds could not withstand the raw, unfiltered power. The elders of the choir began to convulse, their bodies arching in agony as their empty minds were flooded with the very chaos they had been used to contain. The Semnai was free. Chapter 10. The Great Calm. The world dissolved into psychic noise. The unleashed consciousness of the Semnai, amplified by the now uncontrolled I, was not a directed attack but a chaotic, absolute force. It was the psychic equivalent of a supernova. Pema collapsed, her body twitching, a thin line of blood trickling from her nose. The watchers who had followed them into the chamber were on the floor, screaming, their minds shattering like glass. In the village below, the lights in the houses went out. A collective, silent scream rose from the valley as hundreds of calmed minds, with no defenses, no ego, no sense of self, were overloaded and extinguished at once. The Lama's perfect village had become a graveyard in an instant. His great calm had become the great death. High Lama Dorje Gyatso was on his knees, his ancient face a mask of horror and disbelief. He stared at the convulsing bodies of his choir, at the crimson, wrathful glare of the eye. "No," he whispered, "this was not the way. The balance is broken." Rhea, Lamo, and Tenzin were still standing, sheltered by the very fevers the Lama despised. Their strong emotions, their anger and grief, were shields. They were anchors of identity in a hurricane that erased the self. The entity began to manifest physically. The air grew thick, shimmering like heat haze. The stone floor began to warp and buckle as the laws of physics frayed at the edges. A voice echoed in their minds, not of words, but of pure, insatiable hunger. Lamo staggered to her feet, her knife in her hand. Her eyes were fixed on the broken form of the High Lama. "He destroyed them all," she snarled. "He has to pay." She lunged toward him, but Rhea grabbed her arm. "Killing him does nothing. The eye is the problem. It's an open wound now." Rhea's mind raced, grabbing onto Lamo's legend. The true song, a frequency that can shatter the crystal. It wasn't a song of peace. It had to be the opposite. A weapon made of the very thing the Lama sought to destroy. A focused, resonant blast of pure, raw emotion. "Lamo, listen to me," Rhea shouted, forcing the woman to look at her. "Your rage, don't waste it on him. Use it. Aim it at the crystal." She turned to Tenzin, who was staring, terrified at the warping reality around them. "Tenzin, your fear, that moment in the chair, feel it. Aim it." They looked at her as if she were insane. "I can't do it alone," Rhea yelled, her voice desperate. "It needs to be focused. It needs to be a chorus." She closed her eyes, turning inward one last time. She ripped open the lead-lined box in her heart and let the grief for Rohan out, not as a wave of sorrow, but as a focused, piercing beam of absolute loss. It was the most painful thing she had ever done. She aimed that pain straight up at the crimson, screaming eye. Lamo, seeing the logic in Rhea's madness, let out a roar of pure, accumulated hatred. She channeled a lifetime of subjugation, the murder of her brother, the theft of her people's souls, into a psychic spear of pure vengeance and hurled it upward. Tenzin, seeing their example, embraced his terror. He relived the feeling of the obsidian needle at his eye, the absolute certainty of his own violation, and screamed it at the ceiling. Grief, rage, fear. The three most powerful human emotions, the heart of the fever, focused into a single, harmonic chord of psychic violence. The crimson eye began to vibrate, a high-pitched, keening sound filled the air. Fine cracks began to appear on its surface. The High Lama struggled to his feet. He saw what they were doing. He looked from the shattering crystal to the dead village below, and in his ancient eyes, a flicker of understanding, of terrible, final clarity, appeared. He had sought to remove the storm and had, in doing so, removed the soul. He had created a silence so profound that the only thing left to hear was the screaming of the abyss. With the last of his strength, he walked toward the center of the room, directly under the groaning crystal. He raised his hands not in attack but in surrender. He opened his own mind, adding his centuries of disciplined, focused psychic energy, the very power he had used to control the dam into their chaotic, emotional assault. He was not trying to stop them. He was helping them. It was his final penance. The combined energies were too much. The High Lama was vaporized in a flash of white light. At the same moment, the eye of the peak, with a final, silent, terrible flash, exploded into a billion shards of dead, inert crystal. The pressure was gone. The warping of reality snapped back to normal. The psychic noise vanished. The presence of the Semnai, its amplifier and its prison shattered, was gone. A silence. A true silence. Not the heavy, oppressive quiet of the great calm, but the natural, empty silence of a high, lonely place. Rhea, Lamo, and Tenzin collapsed to the floor, utterly spent, their minds and souls scoured clean. They were alive. They had survived. They walked out of the ruined monastery into the first light of dawn. The air was crisp and clean. Below them, the village of Gankar was still and quiet. A perfect, beautiful tomb. They did not look back. They walked to the edge of the plateau, to the start of the path of balance. It looked different now. It was not a barrier or a test. It was a bridge. A way back to the chaotic, messy, painful, beautiful world of the living. Together, the medic, the mourner, and the boy who refused to be quieted took the first step on the long path down the mountain, leaving the silent, perfect village and the ghosts of their past behind them in the cold, thin air. Chapter 11: The Longest Step. The sun crested the eastern peaks, its light a cruel, indifferent blade across the snow. It illuminated the silent, perfect geometry of the dead village behind them. There was no smoke rising from the chimneys. No figures moved in the streets. The great calm was finally absolute. Rhea stood at the head of the path of balance, Rohan's ice axe in one hand, the small leather pouch of Pema's tools tucked inside her parka. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had stumbled onto this plateau, a lone hunter searching for a ghost. Now she was a different creature entirely, a shepherd to a flock of two broken souls. Tenzin's face was slack with shock, his eyes wide and unfocused as he stared back at the village that had been his entire world. Lamo's expression was harder to read. Her face, bruised and cut, was a mask of stone. The fire of her rage had burned out, leaving behind only cold, gray ash. She looked at her home and Rhea could see no grief, no triumph, only a vast, devastating emptiness. "We have to move," Rhea said, her voice a raw croak. "The weather can turn in an instant. We go now, while the light is good." Neither of them responded. They were statues carved from trauma. Rhea walked to Tenzin and gently turned him away from the village. "Look at the path, Tenzin," she commanded, her voice firm but not unkind. "Look at your feet. One step, then the next one, that's all there is." She did the same for Lamo, whose gaze was locked on the dead monastery. "Lamo, it's over. We survived. Now we have to live. Help me get him down." Lamo blinked, a flicker of the old fire returning to her eyes. Survival. It was a language she understood. She nodded, her jaw tight, and took Tenzin's other arm. The descent was a unique form of hell. Going up, Ria's fear had been sharp, focused on her own survival. Going down, her fear was a dull, sprawling ache, a terror for the two people whose lives now depended on her. Tenzin was clumsy, his coordination wrecked by exhaustion and shock. Lamo, though sure-footed, favored her injured arm, her movements stiff and pained. The ancient rope line, which had seemed a comfort on the ascent, now looked like a frayed, rotten thread ready to snap. They moved at a torturously slow pace. Ria took the lead, testing every foothold, checking the integrity of every iron spike before allowing the others to follow. The abyss below seemed more hungry, the churning clouds more malevolent. The wind had returned, a low, mournful moan that whispered through the rocks. It sounded like the groans of the stillborn, like the final, silent scream of the village. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, reflecting off the ice and snow with a blinding intensity. Ria's snow goggles did little to stop the searing pain in her eyes. Thirst was a constant, rasping presence. They ate snow, but it offered little relief. Around midday, they stopped to rest on a slightly wider section of the ledge. Tenzin slumped against the rock face, his breathing shallow. "I can't," he whispered, his eyes closed. "My legs, they won't hold." "They will," Ria said. She opened her pack, her fingers stiff and clumsy with cold. She had a single, half-frozen protein bar left. She broke it into 3 pieces. "Eat this. We're not dying here." Lamo took her piece without a word. She had not spoken since they left the plateau. She simply watched the path, her eyes narrowed, as if she could see enemies in the shifting mists. As Ria handed Tenzin his piece, a tremor ran through the mountain. It was not a violent quake, but a deep, resonant shudder, as if something colossal in the deep rock had shifted in its sleep. A shower of ice and rock cascaded from the cliff face above them. "Press against the wall," Ria yelled. They flattened themselves against the cold stone as the debris clattered past. One large rock, the size of a human head, slammed into the path just ahead of them. The ancient flagstone cracked, groaned, and then a whole section of the ledge, 10 feet long, broke away and tumbled into the abyss. It fell in perfect silence, swallowed by the clouds. They stared at the gap. The path was gone. The rope line stretched across the void, sagging and vibrating from the impact. On the other side, the ledge continued. It was only 10 feet. It might as well have been 1,000 miles. Tenzin let out a low, hopeless sound. Lamo stared at the frayed rope, her face grim. "No," Tenzin whispered. "No, we can't." "We can," Ria said, her voice a hard, flat command. She was already uncoiling the modern nylon climbing rope from her pack. It was a short, 50-foot emergency line, but it was strong. She anchored it to a solid iron spike, testing the knot with all her weight. "I will go first. I will secure the other end. Then you will follow." She looked at Lamo. You will have to go hand over hand. Do not look down, do you understand? Lamo nodded, her eyes fixed on the rope. Rhea turned to Tenzin. He was shaking his head, his face ashen. I can't, I will fall. I will not let you fall, Rhea said, her voice softening slightly. I will tie you to the rope. I will be on the other side, pulling. Lamo will be behind you. We will be your bridge. We are all that's left. We get off this mountain together or we die here together. There is no other choice. She clipped herself to the frayed village rope and began to traverse the gap, her feet finding small, slick holds on the sheer rock face beneath it. The wind tore at her, trying to peel her from the mountain. The abyss yawned, promising a swift, cold end. She did not look down. She looked at the iron spike on the other side. One handhold, then the next one. That's all there is. She reached the other side, her arms burning, her lungs screaming for air. She secured her own rope, pulling it taut. She had created a new bridge, a thin line of hope across an impossible gap. She turned and waved at them. Lamo came first, her movements surprisingly fluid despite her injury. She did not hesitate. She moved like a creature born of the high places, her focus absolute. She reached Rhea's side, her breathing heavy. Now it was Tenzin's turn. He was frozen with terror. Rhea and Lamo both called to him, their voices a strange harmony of encouragement and command. Slowly, hesitantly, he clipped his harness to the rope. He began to cross, his body trembling, his eyes squeezed shut. He was halfway across when he slipped. His feet swung out into the void and he let out a choked cry, his entire weight dropping onto the rope. Rhea and Lamo dug in, their boots scraping against the ice, anchoring the line. Tenzin dangled over the abyss, a puppet on a string. Tenzin, open your eyes, Rhea shouted, her voice raw. Look at me, we have you, pull yourself up, pull. He hung there for a terrifying second and Rhea thought he would give up. Then a spark of defiance lit in his eyes. The same spark she had seen when he charged the resonator. With a guttural yell, he began to pull, his arms shaking, his legs kicking for purchase against the rock. Rhea and Lamo hauled on the rope, their muscles straining. Inch by agonizing inch, he dragged himself across the void. He collapsed onto the ledge, gasping and sobbing, but he was across. He was alive. They did not rest. They pushed on, the near disaster having shocked them into a new, grim efficiency. They were no longer three individuals. They were a single entity, a three-headed, six-legged creature of pure survival. And as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they finally reached the end of the path. They stumbled onto the broad, snow-covered foothills where Rohan had made his final camp, leaving the path of balance and its ghosts behind them for good. Chapter 12. The Echoes of the Mountain. The relief of solid ground was fleeting, replaced by a new, more immediate threat. The temperature was plummeting with the setting sun, and the wind had picked up a new, sharper edge. Dark, heavy clouds were rolling in from the west, obscuring the peaks in a shroud of gray. A blizzard was coming. "We need shelter," Rhea said, her words snatched away by the wind. "Now." Rohan's camp was less than a mile away, but in their exhausted state, it was a world away. They needed cover immediately. Lamo, her instincts honed by a lifetime in this environment, scanned the landscape. She pointed toward a dark outcropping of rock, a jagged spine sticking out of the snowfield. There, she said, her first word in hours. A cave, maybe. It was a shallow overhang, barely deep enough to shield them from the wind, but it was better than open ground. They huddled together in the cramped space as the first flakes of snow began to swirl around them. Within minutes, the world outside their small shelter dissolved into a blinding, howling vortex of white. The claustrophobia of the cave was a different kind of prison than the village. Here, there was no false serenity, only the raw, untamed fury of the mountain. The wind shrieked, a high, keening sound that seemed to tear at the rock around them. As darkness fell, the cold became a living thing, a predator that gnawed at their bones. They huddled together for warmth, a miserable pile of shivering bodies. Exhaustion was a heavy blanket, but sleep was impossible. The howling of the wind was filled with other sounds, phantom whispers and echoes of the horrors they had endured. Tenzin was the first to break. He began to twitch in his sleep, his breath catching in his throat. He whimpered low at first, then his eyes shot open, wide and unseeing. "The needle," he gasped, thrashing in the tight space. "It's coming. I can feel it." Rhea grabbed him, pinning his shoulders. "Tenzin, wake up. It's a dream. You are safe. We are out." He fought her for a moment, his mind trapped in the chamber of release. Then his eyes focused, and the terror was replaced by a wave of shame. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Lama watched, her face impassive, but Rhea saw her hand tighten around the hilt of the knife still tucked in her belt. The village was gone, but its ghosts were inside them, more inescapable than any physical prison. Rhea's own mind was a tempest. The image of Rohan, the real Rohan, laughing as he packed his gear, was superimposed over the image of the hollow-eyed man arranging ice shards on a cavern floor. The two realities warred in her head, and the grief she had so brutally suppressed threatened to break free. She fought it back, her discipline the only thing keeping her from screaming into the storm. It was then that a new sound cut through the howl of the blizzard. It was a cry, but it was unlike any animal call Rhea had ever heard. It was a high, thin wail, a sound of absolute, unending agony. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the bones of her skull. Tenzin fell silent, his eyes wide with a new, primal terror. Lamo stiffened, her head cocked, listening. "What was that?" Rhea whispered. "The marrow wailer," Lamo breathed, her voice tight with a fear Rhea had never heard from her before. It was the fear of a local legend proving to be terrifyingly real. The old stories, they said it is a spirit of the ice, a thing that hunts by sensing pain. It is drawn to the sound of weeping. The cry came again, closer this time. It was a sound that promised pain. As it washed over them, a sharp, stabbing agony shot through Rhea's teeth, down her spine. Tenzin cried out, clutching his head. It felt as if their very skeletons were trying to tear their way out of their flesh. "Stay quiet," Lamo hissed through clenched teeth. "Do not make a sound. Do not even cry out in your mind. It hears it all." They huddled in the absolute darkness of their shelter, trying to suppress every whimper, every gasp of pain as the creature's cry echoed across the snowfield. It was a new kind of torture. After facing the psychic horror of the Semnai, they were now being hunted by a creature that fed on their physical suffering. The wailing grew louder, closer. They could hear something moving outside their cave, a heavy, dragging sound like bones scraping on rock. A shadow fell across the entrance of their shelter, blocking out the swirling whiteness of the blizzard. A shape loomed there, tall and gaunt, its limbs impossibly long and thin. It was a silhouette of pure nightmare. It lowered its head, peering into their hiding place. Rhea could not see its face, only a deep, absolute blackness. The creature's cry ripped through the small cave, no longer a distant echo but a direct, focused assault. The pain was blinding, a white-hot agony that threatened to tear a scream from Rhea's throat. She bit down on her own tongue, the coppery taste of blood filling her mouth. Beside her, Tenzin was convulsing silently, tears streaming down his face. Lamo had her knife out, her face a rigid mask of defiance and terror. The creature took a hesitant step into the cave, its foul, cold stench washing over them. This was it. This was the end. They had escaped the intricate, psychological evil of man only to be consumed by the mountain's own mindless, primal hunger. They had survived the rite, only to be broken on the rack of the wailer's song. Chapter 13. Camp of a Ghost. The gaunt silhouette hesitated at the cave's entrance, its featureless head tilting as if listening to something beyond their hearing. The peak of its agonizing cry held for a torturous, eternal second, and then, inexplicably, it began to recede. The creature drew back. The shadow retreated. The dragging sound faded into the howl of the storm. They were left in the ringing silence, their bodies screaming with residual pain. They lay there for a long time, not daring to move, not daring to believe they were alive. The wailer had come to the very threshold, looked upon them, and for some reason had decided they were not the prey it sought. "Why?" Tenzin whispered into the darkness, his voice trembling. "Why did it leave?" Lamo let out a shuddering breath. "The stories. They say it hunts for the loudest pain, the freshest grief." Her voice was heavy with a sudden, dawning comprehension. When the eyes shattered, the village, hundreds of minds breaking at once, a chorus of agony. We are just an echo. It is hunting for the source of the symphony. The thought was grotesque. The monster was drawn to the psychic carnage they had unleashed, now moving toward the silent valley of Gankar to feast on the lingering echoes of its death. They had been saved by the very horror they had created. The blizzard raged for the rest of the night, but the creature did not return. When the first weak gray light of dawn filtered into the cave, the storm had passed. The world outside was a pristine, untouched blanket of fresh snow under a sky the color of slate. It was unnaturally quiet. They stumbled out of the cave, stiff, bruised, and half-frozen. They pushed forward, their movements slow and robotic. The sight of Rohan's camp was what finally broke the spell. Two bright yellow tents, half collapsed under the weight of the new snow. Scientific instruments on tripods looking like skeletal sentinels. A small cooking station, a pot with a frozen mass of something still inside it. It was a scene of sudden departure, of a life interrupted. It was a ghost story written in canvas and aluminum. While Lamo and Tenzin, unfamiliar with such things, looked on with a mixture of awe and caution, Rhea walked through the small camp as if in a trance. This was his space, his world. She ran her gloved hand over the frozen fabric of his tent. She saw the stack of geological survey maps, a half-finished crossword puzzle, a worn copy of a poetry book he had loved. These were the last remnants of her brother, the real one. She unzipped the flap to his personal tent and crawled inside. It was chaos. His sleeping bag was unrolled, his gear strewn about. He had clearly left in a hurry, taking only what he needed for the final ascent. On a small, folding table amidst a clutter of notes and instruments sat his laptop. Beside it was a framed photo, face down in the snow that had blown in. She picked it up and wiped the ice away. It was a picture of the two of them taken years ago on a beach. They were younger, their faces bright with sun and easy laughter, his arms slung around her shoulders. She stared at the image, at the man who was, at the brother she had lost twice, once to the mountain and once to the madness of men. The dam of her control finally broke. It was not the explosive, psychic grief from the cavern. It was a quiet, human sorrow. She sat in the freezing tent, clutching the photo to her chest, and she wept. She cried for her brother, for the people of the silent village, for Lamo and Tenzin, and for the part of herself she had been forced to kill on that mountaintop. Lamo and Tenzin left her alone, understanding without words that this was a grief she had to face by herself. They busied themselves with practicalities, clearing snow, searching for food packets, their quiet, purposeful movements a respectful distance away. When Rhea finally emerged, her eyes were swollen, her face raw, but her spirit felt lighter. The grief was not gone, but it was no longer a weapon or a monster. It was just a part of her now, a scar she would carry forever. She found a solar-powered radio set among Rohan's equipment. It was a long shot, but the sun was out, its rays weak but present. She set up the panel, connected the wires, and turned the dial. For an hour there was only static, the sound of an empty world. She was about to give up when a voice crackled through the speaker, faint and distorted by distance and atmosphere. I repeat, this is Indian Army Search and Rescue calling any station. Whether window is closing. Repeat, calling any station. Rhea grabbed the microphone, her heart hammering. This is Rhea Sharma, she said, her voice cracking. I am at the base camp of the Rohan Sharma expedition. I am here. I am alive. And I am not alone. The static hissed for a long moment. Then the voice came back, clearer this time, filled with disbelief and excitement. We copy you, Sharma. We have your position, the storm. We thought. Stand by for coordinates. A helicopter is being dispatched. Stand by. Rescue. The word felt foreign, unreal. She looked at Lamo and Tenzin. They were staring at the radio, at this box that spoke with the voice of an invisible world. They had survived. They were going to be saved. But as Rhea looked at their faces, one hardened by a loss she could never truly comprehend, the other a boy torn from the only reality he had ever known, she realized the truth. They weren't being rescued to safety. They were being rescued from one prison and delivered to another, larger one. A world that would not understand their scars, that would call their stories madness. that had no cure for the echoes of a silent mountain they would carry inside them forever. Chapter 14. The Iron Bird. The sound came first. It was a distant, rhythmic chopping, a sound that did not belong to the mountain. It was not the howl of the wind or the groan of the ice or the cry of a beast. It was a sound of brutal, mechanical power, and it grew steadily louder, vibrating through the thin, cold air. Tenzin, who had been methodically sorting through Rohan's food packets, froze. He looked to the sky, his face a mask of bewildered terror. Lamo shot to her feet, her hand instantly on her knife, her body coiled like a predator sensing a new and unnatural threat. "What is that?" Tenzin asked, his voice a whisper. "Our rescue," Rhea said, though the word felt inadequate. She watched their faces, seeing the approaching helicopter not through her own eyes but through theirs. It was not a symbol of hope. It was a monster, an iron bird screaming its way into their silent, broken world. It appeared moments later, a dark, dragonfly-like shape against the brilliant blue of the sky. It grew larger, the rhythmic chopping becoming a deafening, percussive roar that battered them, a physical assault of sound. The wind from its rotors blasted the campsite, whipping snow into a furious, stinging vortex. Tenzin fell to his knees, covering his ears, his body trembling. Lamo stood her ground, her feet planted wide, her knife held low, her face a snarl of defiant terror as she stared up at the machine descending from the heavens. The helicopter did not land. It hovered 20 feet above the snowfield, the noise and whined a localized hurricane. A door slid open, and two figures in heavy, padded uniforms and dark helmets began to lower a rescue basket on a thick steel cable. They were efficient, their movements precise, their faces obscured by dark visors. They were utterly alien. Rhea knew she had to act, to be the bridge between these two impossible worlds. She moved to Lamo, placing a hand on her arm. "Lamo, they are here to help us," she shouted over the rotor wash. "They are friends. You have to put the knife away, please." Lamo looked from the terrifying machine to the strange, faceless men, then to Rhea. Her grip on the knife was white-knuckled. Trust was a currency she no longer possessed, but she saw the desperation in Rhea's eyes, the plea. Slowly, reluctantly, she slid the knife back into its sheath. Getting Tenzin into the basket was an ordeal. He was paralyzed by fear, a terror as profound as any he had felt in the chamber of release. Rhea had to physically half-carry, half-shove him into the swaying cage. Once he was in, one of the rescuers descended on the cable, a figure of calm, professional competence. He clipped Tenzin's harness to the basket and gave a thumbs up. The boy was hoisted into the sky, a sacrifice to a new god. Lamo was next. She climbed in with a rigid, controlled poise, her eyes never leaving the machine, her hand never straying far from her knife. She did not look like someone being rescued. She looked like a warrior being taken prisoner. Finally, it was Rhea's turn. As the basket ascended, she looked down at Rohan's camp, at the half-collapsed tents and the scattered remnants of his last days. She looked toward the towering, indifferent peaks where the silent village of Gankar now stood as a mass grave. She was leaving it all behind, a chapter of her life so horrific, so unbelievable. It already felt like a fever dream. Inside the belly of the helicopter, the sensory assault was even worse. The noise was a physical thing, a vibration that rattled her teeth. The cabin was a chaotic world of flashing lights, complex controls, and shouting men. Tenzin was huddled in a corner, his eyes squeezed shut, his body rigid. Lamo sat bolt upright, her back pressed against the wall, her gaze darting everywhere, cataloging every detail, assessing every threat. A man with captain's bars on his uniform and kind, tired eyes leaned over to Rhea, offering her a headset. She slipped it on, and the roar of the rotors was replaced by a clear, calm voice in her ears. "Dr. Sharma, I'm Captain Singh," he said. "We've been searching for your brother's expedition for 6 weeks. We had all but given up hope. It's a miracle." Rhea nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "The reports said he was alone," the captain continued, his voice a careful, professional probe. He gestured with his chin toward Lamo and Tenzin. "Who are your friends?" Rhea looked at them, the warrior and the broken boy, the last survivors of a place that never existed. How could she explain? Where could she even begin? "They are survivors," she said, the word a pale ghost of the truth. "We found each other, they helped me. There was a rock slide, an avalanche." The lie tasted like ash. The captain's eyes lingered on the crude, stitched leather clothing they wore, on the wild, haunted look in their eyes, on the bone hilt of the knife visible at Lamo's hip. He was a professional. He did not question her story. Not yet. He turned his attention back to his console. "We'll have you at the forward operating base in 30 minutes. You'll be safe now." Rhea looked out the window. The mountain range spread out below them, a vast, jagged sea of white and gray. She could see the peak, the place where the eye had been. It looked like any other mountain now, a silent, indifferent slab of rock and ice. But Rhea knew it was a wound, a scar on the world. She thought of the captain's words, "You'll be safe now." She looked at the huddled form of Tenzin, at Lamo's rigid, caged animal posture, and she felt a new, cold dread creep into her heart. The mountain had been a crucible of fire and ice. It had tried to kill them with monsters and madness. But this world of loud noises and kind, questioning men, might prove to be a far more dangerous and far more subtle kind of prison. They were not flying toward safety. They were flying into the heart of a new, more complex storm. Chapter 15: A World of Noise. The forward operating base was a wound of mud and steel carved into the foothills. The moment the helicopter's skids touched down, the doors were thrown open, and Rhea's group was plunged from the focused chaos of the flight into the sprawling, multi-layered chaos of civilization. For Rhea, it was a familiar kind of bedlam. The smell of diesel fumes, the shouts of men, the rumble of engines. It was the background noise of the world she had left behind. But for Lamo and Tenzin, it was a physical assault. Tenzin stumbled down the steps and simply stopped, his senses completely overloaded. He stood on the tarmac, a small, still point in a vortex of motion. Jeeps rumbled past. Men in uniform carrying rifles jogged by. A generator roared nearby. The air was thick with 1,000 new smells. His face went pale, his eyes wide and glassy. He was a circuit board with too much current running through it. He was shutting down. Lamo reacted in the opposite way. Every new stimulus was a threat. Her head was on a constant swivel, her body radiating a tense, aggressive energy. When a medic, a young woman with a kind face, approached her with a blanket and a warm smile, Lamo flinched back, her hand flying to her knife. The medic froze, her smile vanishing. "It's all right," Rhea said quickly, stepping between them. "They're just not used to people." It was the most pathetic understatement she had ever uttered. They were ushered into a medical tent. It was brightly lit, sterile, and filled with the clean, chemical scent of antiseptic. The noise from the base was muffled here, but it was replaced by the soft, rhythmic beeping of machines. To Tenzin, who had only ever known the silence of the great calm or the organic hum of the choir, the insistent, artificial pulse of a heart monitor was a new kind of torture. A doctor, a brisk, middle-aged man with a graying mustache, began his assessment. He tried to examine Tenzin, but the boy was unresponsive, his gaze fixed on a point 1,000 miles away. He was catatonic. "Severe shock, hypothermia, malnutrition," the doctor muttered, shining a light into Tenzin's unblinking eyes. "We'll need to sedate him and start an IV." The word sedate sent a jolt of ice through Rhea's veins. It was too close to calm. When the doctor turned to Lamo, she backed into a corner of the tent. "Stay away from me," she snarled, the words a low, guttural warning. She held her injured arm close to her body, hiding the wound as a wolf would. "Ma'am, you're injured. Let me just take a look," the doctor said in a soothing tone, taking a step forward. It was the wrong move. Lamo drew her knife. It was not a threat, it was a promise. The medics and soldiers in the tent froze. Someone reached for the radio on his belt. "Don't," Rhea commanded, holding up a hand. She approached Lamo slowly, her own hands open and visible. She spoke in a low, calm voice, ignoring the stunned audience. "Lamo, this is a place of healing, like Pema's workshop, but different. They are healers. They want to help your arm. They are not chirurgeons. There are no obsidian knives here." Lamo's eyes, filled with a wild, cornered fury, darted from Rhea to the doctor and back. She was an antibody, and this new world was a virus. "They will not make me quiet," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No one will make you quiet," Rhea promised, hoping it was not another lie. "But you are hurt. Let me look, just me." Slowly, Lamo's grip on the knife loosened. She watched, her suspicion a palpable force, as Rhea gently examined the crude bandage. The wound was deep, inflamed, the edges red and angry. It needed to be cleaned and stitched properly. Later, Rhea was escorted to a small, prefabricated office to be debriefed. A stern-faced colonel with cold, intelligent eyes sat opposite her, a file on the desk between them. "Dr. Sharma," he began, his voice devoid of warmth. "Your story is incomplete. You claim there was an avalanche. Yet the three of you have injuries, a deep knife wound on the woman, severe bruising on the boy, that are not consistent with a natural disaster. You have signs of extreme psychological distress. We found your brother's camp. There was no evidence of an avalanche there." Rhea's heart pounded. The lie was already falling apart. "We were attacked," she said, shifting to the next layer of her fabricated story. "By a local tribe, uncontacted. They are hostile. They took us. My brother. He didn't survive the encounter. We escaped during an earthquake that destroyed their settlement." The colonel's eyes narrowed. He was not buying it. A lost tribe, how convenient. Rhea reached into her parka and pulled out the leather pouch. She opened it and emptied the contents onto his desk. The obsidian tools, the scalpels, the probes, the long, thin sliver, clattered onto the metal surface, glistening under the harsh fluorescent light. The colonel stared at the objects. He picked one up, a flaked scalpel, turning it over in his fingers. He had seen primitive weapons before, but these were different. They were tools. They were instruments of some dark, unknown craft. "They used these on him," Rhea said, her voice a low, steady thrum of controlled rage. "And they were going to use them on the boy." A flicker of something, belief, or at least serious concern, crossed the colonel's face. He looked from the obsidian sliver to Rhea's haunted, exhausted eyes. He was a man who dealt in enemies and weapons, and he had just been handed evidence of both. "This changes things," he said slowly. He picked up his phone. "These two with you. They now represent a significant intelligence and security issue. They are stateless, unidentified. For their own protection and for ours, they will need to be placed in a secure facility until we can determine the nature of the threat." He was not looking at her as he spoke. He was looking at the obsidian needle, at the proof of a savagery he could understand. Rhea felt the walls of a new, more sophisticated cage begin to close around them. Lamo and Tenzin were no longer survivors. They were specimens, and the bureaucracy of the modern world, with its forms and protocols and sterile rooms, was about to become their new, and perhaps most inescapable captor. Chapter 16. The Quarantine of the Soul. The secure facility was a medical wing of a military hospital 100 miles from the mountains. It was a world of polished linoleum floors, whitewashed walls, and the pervasive, low hum of air conditioning. It was cleaner, brighter, and in many ways more terrifying than the chamber of release. Rhea was given a private room. It had a bed with clean sheets, a window that looked out onto a manicured lawn, and a door that locked from the outside. She was a patient, a witness, a prisoner. Lamo and Tenzin were housed in a separate, more secure section of the wing for observation. Rhea had not been allowed to see them for 2 days. Her time was divided between long, restless hours of solitude and sessions with a woman named Dr. Aruna Singh. She was a military psychiatrist, a civilian contractor with sharp, empathetic eyes and a mind that missed nothing. She did not wear a uniform. She wore elegant silk blouses and asked questions that felt like surgical instruments. "Let's go over your account again, Rhea," Dr. Singh said during their 3rd session. Her office was comfortable, filled with books and plants, a carefully constructed illusion of safety. "This tribe, you call them the calmed. An interesting choice of words. It implies a process, a change from one state to another." "They were without emotion," Rhea said, sticking to the script. "It was their culture, their religion." "A religion enforced with obsidian knives," the doctor countered gently. "That sounds less like faith and more like a procedure. The psychological trauma you and the others exhibit, it's profound. Especially the boy, Tenzin. He's in a dissociative state. We have him on antipsychotics to manage his episodes, but he is unresponsive. The words hit Rhea like a physical blow. Antipsychotics, episodes. They were drugging him into a chemical calm. They were using modern science to achieve the same result as the High Lama. The irony was so bitter it made her want to vomit. And the woman, Lamo, Dr. Singh continued, watching Rhea's reaction. She exhibits extreme paranoia and aggression. She refuses all food. She has fashioned a weapon from the leg of her metal bed frame. She is a danger to herself and my staff. She speaks of a fever in the blood. Is that what her people called emotion, Rhea? Rhea said nothing. Every answer she gave was a betrayal. Every lie she told to protect them only seemed to tighten their cage. I am trying to help them, Rhea, the doctor said, her voice softening. But their trauma is unique. It doesn't fit the standard PTSD profiles. To treat them, I need to understand what was done to them, what they saw, what you saw. Rhea looked at this intelligent, reasonable woman. How could she explain the Semnai, a psychic parasite, a creature that fed on emotion? They would transfer her from this comfortable room to a padded one. The truth was a passport to a diagnosis of insanity. The military had recovered everything from Rohan's camp, including his equipment. After days of negotiation, Rhea had been given his laptop. It was her only connection to him, her only source of potential answers beyond her own fractured memories. She spent her nights poring over his files, his familiar desktop a ghostly comfort. Most of it was raw geological data, incomprehensible strings of numbers and graphs. But in a hidden, encrypted partition, she found what she was looking for. Rohan had been more thorough than she could have imagined. He had recorded everything. There were spectrographs, ELF wave recordings, and detailed notes. And there was a final video log. She worked for hours, her fingers flying across the keyboard, using the decryption keys he had taught her years ago as a game. Finally, a file unlocked. A video player opened on the screen. Rohan's face filled the frame. He was inside his tent, the light of a headlamp casting deep shadows across his features. He looked exhausted, haunted, but his eyes burned with a feverish intensity. This was recorded just before he ascended the path. "Okay, final log," he began, his voice low and strained. "The anomaly is not geologic, it's not magnetic, it's biological or something else. I'm recording persistent, rhythmic, extremely low-frequency waves emanating from the peak, and they match the patterns of a human electroencephalogram. Specifically, a mind in a deep, non-dreaming state of meditation." He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting nervously toward the tent flap. "It's a signal, a broadcast, and it's calming, dangerously so. I find my mind wandering. I forget what I'm afraid of. It's like a psychic siren song. The closer I get, the stronger it becomes." He leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The old maps, the legends the locals tell, they speak of a place that grants a final peace. They're not talking about a monastery, They're talking about this signal. It promises to take away the pain, all of it. And God after everything, after Mom. It's a tempting offer." He shook his head, a flicker of his old self returning. "But it's not right. It feels predatory. I have to see what the source is. I have to get a direct reading, but if I don't come back, if this thing is what I think it is, then you have to destroy this data. Rhea, listen to me. Do not follow me. Some things, some silences, are not meant to be broken. Some doors are meant to stay closed. The video ended. Rhea sat in the sterile silence of her room, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating her tear-streaked face. He had known, he had sensed the trap, and he had walked into it anyway, driven by the same scientific curiosity that had driven him his entire life. He had left her a warning, a final act of brotherly protection, a warning that had arrived weeks too late. But he had also left her something else: proof, scientific, measurable data of the psychic machine, a language this world might actually understand. A knock came at her door. It was Dr. Singh. "It's late, Rhea," she said gently. "You should rest." Rhea looked from the doctor's concerned face to the screen of the laptop. The data was a weapon. It could be the key to freeing Lamo and Tenzin, to making the world believe. But it could also be a key to Pandora's box. Rohan's warning echoed in her mind. Destroy this data. She now understood the terrible choice he had faced, the choice between the dangerous truth and the safe lie. She was no longer just a survivor. She was the unwilling inheritor of a terrible and powerful secret. Chapter 17. The Language of the Machine. The decision gnawed at Rhea for 2 days. She replayed Rohan's warning in her mind, his haunted face a constant presence. Some doors are meant to stay closed. He had understood the danger. He had seen the seductive, predatory nature of the Great Calm. To reveal the existence of a psychic technology, a machine that could literally erase pain, fear, and grief. What would this world do with that? Would they see it as a horror to be destroyed, or as a weapon to be coveted, a cure to be commercialized? She thought of Tenzin, sedated in a sterile room, his mind a battlefield of trauma and antipsychotics. She thought of Lamo, caged and starving, slowly being crushed by a world she could not comprehend. Rohan's warning was about protecting the world from Gankar, but Rhea's duty was to protect the last survivors of Gankar from the world. And she made her choice. She requested a meeting with Dr. Singh and the Colonel. They met in the same sterile debriefing room as before. The obsidian tools were gone, replaced by a file thick with psychiatric evaluations and security reports. "I'm ready to tell you the truth," Rhea began, her voice steady. She took a deep breath, clutching Rohan's laptop. "The entire truth, but first I have conditions. Lamo and Tenzin are to be moved to a private, non-military facility, a quiet place in the countryside. Dr. Singh will be their sole psychiatric caregiver, no one else, and I will have unlimited access to them. Their care will be under my supervision." The Colonel's face hardened. "You are in no position to be making demands, Dr. Sharma." "I am in the only position," Rhea countered, her gaze unwavering. She opened the laptop and turned it to face them. She played Rohan's final video log. They watched in silence as her dead brother spoke, his voice filling the small room. The Colonel's skepticism slowly eroded, replaced by a look of intense, focused concentration. Dr. Singh's clinical composure dissolved into sheer, intellectual astonishment. They were not listening to a frantic survivor's tale. They were listening to a scientist on the verge of a discovery that would rewrite the rules of their reality. When the video finished, Rhea did not stop. She opened the data files, the graphs, the waveform analyses, the color-coded charts of rhythmic, low-frequency emissions. "My brother wasn't just a climber," she said, her voice a low, clinical monotone that mirrored Rohan's. "He was a brilliant geophysicist and an expert in ELF wave propagation. What he recorded is a machine-generated psychic signal, amplified through a crystalline lattice, what the villagers called the IN, powered by a biological chorus, a machine designed to suppress higher emotional functions in the human brain. It wasn't a religion, Colonel. It was a technology, a weapon of absolute control." She had translated the horror into their language. Not the language of spirits and fevers, but the language of signals, threats, and technology. Dr. Singh was pale, her mind racing to connect this impossible data with the unique trauma she was treating. The psychological effects, a forced state of dissociation, the brain's emotional centers simply shut down. It would explain their symptoms and their terror. They weren't just tortured, they were being erased. The colonel stared at the screen, his mind processing not the science but the implications. A weapon that could pacify a population without firing a shot. A technology that could end dissent, end rebellion, end thought. "This data," he said, his voice a low growl. "Where is the source now, this eye?" "It was destroyed," Rhea lied, the words tasting like poison. "The earthquake that allowed our escape. It collapsed the entire peak. There's nothing left. This data is all that remains of it." It was the most important lie she would ever tell. She had to cut the thread. She had to make them believe the source was gone, that this was an archaeological discovery, not an active threat to be secured and reverse-engineered. The colonel looked at her, his eyes cold and calculating. He did not fully believe her, but he had no way to disprove it. Sending a team back to that peak was a logistical and political nightmare. For now, this laptop was the only prize. "Your conditions," he said after a long silence, "they are considerable. The data on this drive is the only proof of a technology that could change the face of human conflict," Rhea said, her hand resting on the laptop. "And I am the only one who can fully interpret it. You will give me what I want, or I will wipe this drive and the world will never know what my brother found. The choice is yours." She was bluffing. Wiping the drive would mean betraying Rohan's legacy, his final sacrifice. But as she looked at the colonel's hard, acquisitive face, she knew it was the only move she had. She had learned the lessons of the mountain well. You do not show weakness. You do not feed the predator. The colonel stared at her for a full minute, a silent battle of wills across the metal desk. Finally, he nodded, a curt, angry gesture. "Agreed. A private facility. You and Dr. Singh will have oversight. In return, you will provide my teams with a full, unredacted analysis of every piece of data on this drive. You will cooperate fully. Am I understood?" "Perfectly," Rhea said. She had won. She had traded the world's most dangerous secret for the lives of her friends. It was a devil's bargain, and she had no idea what the ultimate cost would be. But as she walked out of the room, she felt a sliver of the peace the High Lama had so grotesquely coveted. Not the peace of emptiness, but the peace of purpose. She had found a new path, not up a mountain, but through the treacherous, political landscape of a world that was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Chapter 18: The Quiet Place. The facility was a repurposed country estate, nestled in a gentle, green valley hundreds of miles from any military base, any city, any mountain. It was surrounded by rolling hills and quiet forests. The air was thick and humid, filled with the scent of damp earth and the drone of insects. It was a world away from the thin, cold silence of the Himalayas. It was a place of healing. Rhea, Tenzin, and Lamo arrived in an unmarked black car. The transition was jarring. Lamo, who had been a caged tiger in the concrete world of the hospital, seemed to shrink in this soft, green landscape. She looked at the sprawling, ancient trees as if they were threats, her eyes searching for crags and ledges, for the hard, unforgiving lines of her home. Tenzin had been slowly weaned off the heavy sedatives. He was no longer catatonic, but he was a ghost. He moved through the world with a listless, haunted detachment. The vibrant, green world of the valley was as alien and frightening to him as the military base had been. It was too loud, too bright, too alive. They were given a private cottage on the grounds. There were no locks on the doors. Dr. Singh was true to her word, creating an environment of gentle de-escalation. But there were still watchers. Quiet, discreet security personnel dressed as gardeners and maintenance staff. The cage was now invisible, but it was still there. The first weeks were a slow, agonizing process of deacclimatization. Lamo spent her days packing the woods at the edge of the property, her knife a constant, illegal companion she refused to surrender. She was mapping her new territory, testing its boundaries. Rhea would watch her from a distance, recognizing the caged energy, the need for a defensible perimeter. Tenzin would sit by a small, placid lake for hours, staring at his own reflection in the water. He was trying to find the boy he had been before the rite, before the terror. Dr. Singh would sometimes sit with him, not speaking, simply sharing the silence. Her approach was one of patience, of letting the trauma breathe. Rhea's life was a strange dichotomy. By day, she was a caregiver, a translator, a bridge between two worlds. She taught Tenzin how to use a fork. She explained the concept of rain to Lamo, who had only ever known snow. She was their shield, their guide, their only anchor in this bewildering new reality. By night, she was a collaborator. She would sit in her room, the door locked, and work with the Colonel's encrypted data network. She fed his teams Rohan's findings, piece by piece, sanitizing the data, removing any hint that the source could be recreated. She described the effects of the psychic broadcast in dry, clinical terms, turning the soul-destroying horror of the Great Calm into a series of quantifiable, psychological phenomena. She was taking the soul out of the machine, rendering it a dead artifact for them to study. One evening, she found Lamo sharpening her knife on a smooth river stone by the lake. "You should not have this," Rhea said, her voice gentle. "It is the only thing that is still mine," Lamo replied without looking up. The rhythmic scrape of steel on stone was the only sound. "What will you do with it, Lamo?" Lamo stopped. She looked up, and in the fading twilight, Rhea saw the profound, bottomless loss in her eyes. In my village, when a hunter loses their purpose, they offer their blade back to the mountain. I have no purpose, and there is no mountain. Your purpose is to live, Rhea said, to teach Tenzin, to remember the ones we lost. I do not know how to live in a world without edges, Lama whispered. Without a peak to climb or a monster to fight. This quiet place, it is a different kind of silence. It is soft. It suffocates. Later that week, Rhea found Tenzin in the small library of the main house. He was holding a book, a children's atlas, and staring at a map of the world. His finger was tracing the massive, jagged spine of the Himalayas. It was so small, he said, his voice barely a whisper. My whole world, from one side of this page to the other. The world is a big place, Tenzin, Rhea said, sitting beside him. Is it all like this? He asked, gesturing to the window to the gentle green landscape. So loud, so full of color. Some parts, other parts are different. There are deserts, oceans, cities that are louder than any machine you have ever heard. He looked down at the book, at the endless, sprawling continents. A flicker of something, not fear but a nascent, fragile curiosity, sparked in his eyes. It was the first sign of the boy he had been, the builder of walls, the one who wanted to create something of his own. Will I ever see my home again? He asked. Rhea looked at the map, at the tiny, insignificant spot that had held such monumental horror. Gankar was not on this map. It was a ghost, a secret. No, Tenzin, she said softly. That home is gone. We have to build a new one. He nodded slowly, accepting her words with a sad, quiet maturity that broke her heart. He closed the atlas and placed it carefully back on the shelf. It was a small gesture, but it was a beginning. He was not looking back at the world he had lost, but tentatively, cautiously, beginning to explore the one he had been thrown into. Rhea knew their healing was a path as long and treacherous as the one they had descended. There would be storms. There would be gaps in the ledge. But here, in this quiet, suffocating, beautiful place, they had taken the first step. They were learning the language of a new world, a world where silence was not a weapon, and where the loudest noises could sometimes be the beginning of a song. Chapter 19. A Different Kind of Silence. Years passed. The quiet place became a home. Rhea never left. She became a permanent fixture of the facility, a consultant, a researcher, her official title a smokescreen for her true role, the keeper of the secret. The colonel, now a general, kept his word. His teams analyzed the sanitized data she provided, treating it as a fascinating but dead-end anomaly. The world moved on, blissfully unaware of the psychic abyss that had nearly opened. Rhea had closed the door and in doing so had locked herself inside with its ghosts. Tenzin grew into a young man. The quiet, haunted boy discovered a passion for the very thing that had terrified him, the complex, intricate machinery of the modern world. He did not want to build walls of stone, he wanted to build circuits. He went to college, studying engineering, his mind uniquely suited to the precise, logical language of machines. The chaos of human emotion still troubled him, but in the clean, predictable world of code and current, he found a new kind of calm. He was building a new kind of fortress for himself, not of silence, but of logic. Lamo never lost her wildness, but it softened. She found her purpose not in fighting monsters, but in understanding the gentle, sprawling life of her new home. She became an expert botanist, her knowledge of the mountain's sparse, hardy flora translating into an intuitive genius for the lush life of the valley. She walked the forests, no longer as a caged animal testing its bars, but as a queen surveying her domain. She never surrendered her knife, but Rhea would sometimes find her using it to carefully prune a rose bush or to cut a perfect, ripe apple from a branch. She had found a new mountain, one that grew from the earth instead of scraping the sky. One cool autumn afternoon, the three of them sat on a hill overlooking the valley. They were no longer a medic and her traumatized charges. They were a family, forged in a crucible of unimaginable horror. A strange, fractured, but unbreakable family. "Do you ever think about it?" Tenzin asked, his gaze distant. He did not have to say what it was. "Every day," Rhea replied. "I tried to forget," Lamo said, her voice a low murmur. "For a long time I used the silence here to bury the silence from there. But it does not work. It is a part of us. The scar is the proof of the wound." Rhea looked at them, at the man who had found his peace in a world of complex noise, and the woman who had found her strength in a world of quiet growth. She thought of her brother, of his final, desperate warning. He had been afraid of what the silence could do to the world, but he had never imagined what the world could do for the survivors of that silence. "He was wrong, you know," Rhea said softly. "The High Lama, he thought emotion was a fever, a sickness to be cured, but he was wrong. It's not a sickness, it's a compass. It points to what we have lost, and it points to what we have found." She looked out at the valley, at the soft, hazy light of the setting sun. She had made a deal with the devil, trading a world-changing secret for their lives for this peace. She would carry the weight of that secret forever. It was her burden, her penance, and her purpose. The world was safe. Her family was safe. And in the quiet of the coming evening, for the first time in a very long time, Rhea Sharma felt a sense of calm. Not the empty, sterile calm of the silent village, but a deep, resonant peace. It was not an absence of pain or grief. It was the quiet strength of a scar that had finally, fully healed. The end.